Welcome, you have arrived. Not by chance, perhaps, but by a silent pull, the kind that tugs gently at the heart on a sleepless night. This is the empty boat, a place where stories are not told to entertain, but to awaken, where words are soft as mist, but deep as mountain roots, where silence is not empty, but full of meaning here. Under the moonlit roof of timeless tales, we will walk together through forgotten villages, mist-covered temples, rooms locked by grief, and gardens that remember loss, not to escape the world, but to return to ourselves. Breathe. Let go. The world can wait now. Sit still by the river of your mind. Let us drift gently into the first story. Story 1. The sound of a closed door. The rain had returned to the village after a long silence. It was not the kind of rain that shouted against rooftops or danced madly through gutters. It was the kind that whispered softly, gently as though trying not to wake the ghosts. Akira sat on the floor of his wooden house, barefoot, motionless, staring at a door that had not been opened in 6 years. It was a simple door, made of cedar, faded and slightly warped by time. A white string of prayer beads hung loosely from the handle, untouched. Collecting the hush of the years, that room used to belong to his son. 6 years ago, on a night just like this where the rain crept along the eaves and the moon wore a veil, his 17-year-old son closed that door behind him and never came out. Akira never opened it again. He didn't have the language to face what was on the other side. Or maybe he feared what wasn't. Every evening since, he lit a small lamp, sat by the threshold, and listened. For what, he never said. Perhaps for a footstep, or a breath, or a sign that grief could be reversed by ritual. But nothing came. Only rain, tonight. He placed a thin stick of sandalwood incense by the door. Its smoke curled upwards and then sideways, like it too was unsure where to go. Akira closed his eyes. That's when he remembered something, a conversation, or rather, a fragment of one. Dad, his son, had said once, quietly, when you go silent, it feels colder than winter in here. He hadn't replied, not then. The newspaper was open. The news was bad. His own father had raised him with distance, and he had passed it down, quietly, like a family heirloom no one wanted, but no one refused. That night, 6 years ago, his son left a note. 5 lines, no accusations, just a line that never left Akira's mind. I don't want to leave you, Dad. I just want to leave the silence. Elsewhere, miles away, another man sat by another doorway. His name was Yuta, 32 years old. Once a boy in a psychiatric hospital, now a quiet figure in a Zen temple by the northern mountains. He swept leaves every morning, made tea for visitors, and spoke little. But sometimes, at night, he would sit by the temple bell and close his eyes. He still remembered the woman who once sat beside him in silence, day after day, asking nothing. Her name was Harumi, a therapist. But more than that, she was a mirror one that didn't reflect pain, only presence. Yuta had once asked her, does the sound of a door closing ever stop echoing? And she, after a long pause, had answered, only when we open the one inside us. That night in the temple, Yuta opened his eyes to the sound of the wind. The bell swayed gently. He thought of writing a letter. Back in the village, Akira was breathing slower now. Not asleep, just tired. His memories were active tonight, like they too had been waiting for the rain. He remembered walking past his son's room after the funeral, The police had removed the body. The neighbors had brought food. No one mentioned the silence between father and son. No one dared. He had stood at the door that day and whispered, "I'm sorry." But the words felt borrowed, empty. He never said them again until tonight. He stood, slowly. His legs ached. But his breath was steady. He reached for the door, and this time he turned the handle. The room was as it had been left. The bed was made. A book still lay open on the desk. A small collection of CDs. A poster on the wall, a black and white photo of a river with mist. He stepped inside. The air was thick, not with dust, but with time. On the desk, under a paperweight shaped like a turtle, was the note. The real one, not a copy. He hadn't read it in years. He picked it up. The edges were frayed. "I know you tried in your way. I just couldn't hear it. And maybe that's not your fault. Maybe I closed the door before you did. Maybe I didn't want to be understood. I just wanted to stop pretending I didn't feel anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Dad. I just hope you can forgive yourself." Akira sank to the floor. The weight wasn't on his chest anymore. It was in his throat. For a long time, he said nothing. And then he whispered, "I didn't know how." He stayed there till morning. At sunrise, he opened the window. The scent of wet earth came in. Birds. To Dot later that week, he walked to the edge of the village. There was a Zen temple he had never entered before. An old friend had once mentioned it. He didn't go inside. He just stood at the gate, listening. From somewhere behind the garden wall, a bell rang. Yuuta was sweeping leaves. He looked up, sensing something. Not a person, but a presence. A door opening somewhere else. That evening, Akira went home and began to speak aloud to the closed room, even when it was open. "Good night, son," he said. Every night after that Zen teaching says, when the mind closes, it creates the illusion of separation. When it opens, the illusion falls away. The door was never the problem. The silence around it was Dot. In Buddhist thought, suffering is born not just from pain, from the resistance to pain. Akira resisted grief by embalming it in stillness. Yuuta resisted life by locking it behind a wall of detachment. But through still presence, through witnessing, not fixing something, shifted Harumi, the therapist who once sat beside a boy without asking questions, embodied what in Buddhism is called karu, our compassion without condition. She taught, without teaching. Sometimes healing is not about giving answers, but sharing silence. From a psychological view, Akira and Yuuta both illustrate forms of emotional freezing, avoidant grieving, unspoken trauma, inherited stoicism. In modern terms, we might say Akira had untreated prolonged grief disorder, or that Yuuta had major depressive episodes with suicidal ideation. But beyond diagnosis lies something deeper, the need to be seen without judgment, the need for a door to remain open, even when we're not ready to walk through it. Therapeutic. Models like internal family systems, ifs, speak of exiled parts within us, fragments we shut away to survive. Akira shut away the part of him that could feel. Yuta shut away the part that could trust. Healing began when those parts were allowed, not forced, to come home. There is no neat ending to grief, no resolution to the unanswered question why someone leaves the world early, but there can be a quiet shift, a breath, a step into the room we feared most. Tonight, if you are holding something behind a closed door in your own heart, do not rush to open it. Simply sit with it, breathe, let the rain come. Let the door remain, but promise yourself this: when the time comes, not out of guilt, not from pressure, but from readiness, you will reach for the handle and forgive yourself, even if no one else has. The sound of a closing door is not the end. It is the beginning of listening. And somewhere in the stillness, someone is already waiting, not to speak, not to explain, just to be with you in silence and in peace. Story 2. Ashes beneath the Bodhi tree. The temple at Kogane Ridge was older than memory. It sat beneath a canopy of whispering pines, its wooden eaves weathered by centuries of wind, its stones shaped more by rain than hands. At the center of the grounds stood a Bodhi tree, broad and gnarled, its roots twisted like the veins of the earth itself. Beneath it, travelers often sat to weep, to breathe, or to leave behind what they could no longer carry. That morning, a woman named Naomi arrived, with a clay urn wrapped in white silk. She had walked up the mountain path alone, her hands steady, her eyes not. The ashes inside the urn belonged to her mother, Sayuri. The cremation had been 2 days before. The relatives came. They bowed. They offered incense and shallow words. Then they left. None of them knew what Suri had whispered on her deathbed. Not even Naomi was sure she heard it right. Beneath the Bodhi tree, you'll find the rest of me. And so Naomi came, not to bury, not to pray, but to find what her mother had left behind. She sat on the stone bench under the great tree, the urn beside her. There was no one else there. The early sun spilled golden light through the branches, drawing shapes on the moss below. Birds flickered above like pieces of thought. Naomi took a breath, held it, released. The last time she had been to this temple was 17 years ago, on a field trip. She had been 12. Her mother was still alive then, still laughing at silly things, still pulling her close in the cold. But something had changed not long after. Something invisible, like the beginning of winter. Sayur. I became withdrawn. She stopped painting, stopped singing to the kettle when it boiled. Naomi remembered how the silences grew, like mold in the corners. Her mother had never explained, just drifted away year by year, until one day she was a stranger in the same kitchen. When the cancer came, it was almost a relief. At least it gave a name to the fading dot. Now, with the urn warm from her palms, Naomi tried to make sense of it all. Her mother had left no will, only that one line. Beneath the Bodhi tree, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. It was written in Sayuri's handwriting, thin, graceful, unsure. Naomi hadn't read it yet. It had been sealed with wax, pressed with the shape of a crescent moon. She broke the seal and opened the letter. Naomi, if you are reading this, it means I've returned to dust. But I want you to know that death is not the end. It is only the thinning of the veil. I have carried a truth I was too afraid to tell you while alive. But now, perhaps, it is time. You once asked me, when you were 15, why I never spoke of your father. I told you he died when you were a baby. That was a lie. He is not dead. He is a monk at this temple. His name is Taigen. Go to him, say nothing, just sit. He will understand. Love always. Mother Naomi stared at the ink, until it blurred. The letter trembled in her hands. Taigen. She had seen the name carved on a wooden plaque by the temple gate when she arrived. She stood up slowly, clutching the urn, and walked toward the main hall. The smell of incense grew stronger. Inside, rows of tatami mats led to a simple altar. Behind it, an old man knelt, tending to a bowl of water and arranging a single lotus in a stone vase. He was bald, with a narrow frame, but there was strength in the way he moved. His robes were faded. His back was straight. Naomi said nothing. She only bowed and knelt a few steps behind him. Minutes passed. The old man did not turn. Then, in a voice calm and clear, he said, "You've come for what cannot be spoken, Naomi." Blinked, he turned then, slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no shock in them, only recognition. "I knew you would come," he said. One day, her throat tightened. "Did you know she died?" He nodded. 2 days ago, the pine told me. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You're my," he raised a hand gently. "No labels, not yet." They sat in silence. The Bodhi tree rustled outside. Naomi whispered, "Why did you leave her?" Tegan closed his eyes. "Because I loved her." She frowned. "I left when she became pregnant," he said. "Not to escape her, but to escape myself. I feared who I was becoming, my anger, my pride, the confusion, so I came here. I believed the silence of the monastery could fix what I could not face." Naomi's hands clenched around the urn. "She needed you," she said. "I know," he replied, "and I carry that knowing like a stone in my chest every day." "Then why didn't you ever come back?" "I did," he said. "Once, 5 years after you were born. I stood across the street from the house. I saw you playing in the garden. She was hanging laundry, and I realized I would only hurt you both more if I returned as the man I still hadn't healed." Naomi shook her head. "You abandoned us." Tegan did not flinch. "Yes, I did." The honesty in his voice stunned her. "I was a coward," he said, "and a monk. Sometimes we wear robes to hide the parts of us we're too ashamed to show. But Sari, she forgave me. She came here once, you know, left me a letter under the Bodhi tree. That's when I knew she still carried love and grief." She asked, "Me not to speak to you?" "Not until she was gone. She said it would hurt more to explain than to wait." Naomi stared at the floor. The letter in her pocket burned like a secret. Tegan continued, "She was a stronger soul than I ever deserved. But now you are here, and she has returned to the wind." He reached out, slowly, and touched the urn. "May I show you something?" he asked. Naomi nodded. He rose, and together they walked behind the temple, down a stone path that led to the garden beyond the Bodhi tree. There, under a small wooden shrine, was a circle of smooth stones. In the center, a single candle flickered. Though there was no wind, Taigen took the urn from Naomi and gently poured a portion of the ashes into the soil at the base of the tree. "The Bodhi tree does not judge," he said. "It simply remembers." They stood there for a long time. No words, only the rustle of leaves and the soft breath of spring. When they returned to the bench beneath the tree, Naomi finally asked, "What happens now?" Tegan looked up at the sky. "Now, you decide." "Decide what?" "What story you wish to carry. The one of abandonment or the one of awakening." She hesitated. "I don't know how to forgive," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then start by not hating." A bird landed on the branch above. The light through the leaves danced on Naomi's face. Later, as she prepared to leave, Tegan handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a painting. It was old, the colors fading, but still alive. A woman holding a child by the river. No faces, just forms. She made this, he said, left it for me. But I think it was always meant for you. Naomi touched the brushstrokes with trembling fingers. Back down the mountain path, with the urn lighter and her chest heavier, she realized something. Forgiveness is not a door we walk through once. It is a path we must keep sweeping clear, even when no one watches, and beneath the Bodhi tree. Her mother's ashes rested not in sorrow, but in peace. That night, Naomi lit a candle at home, not for the dead, but for the living parts inside her that still needed light. She wrote a letter she would never send, to the father I never had, to the silence I never understood, to the mother who kept her pain gentle, to the child I still am. I see you, I am you, and I'm learning to love you too. She folded the letter and placed it beneath a potted plant on her windowsill outside. The wind stirred, and the Bodhi tree, though far away, seemed to remember. She closed her eyes and listened. Story 3. The monk who painted crows. He lived at the edge of the last forest in the prefecture, where the pine trees grew hunched and black, and the fog arrived like an old friend that never asked questions. The villagers called him the Crow. Monk, though he wore no robes and offered no blessings. His hut stood alone beneath the cliffs of Mount Hashan, its walls cluttered with scrolls, brushes, and inkstones. He was always painting, but only crows. Not landscapes, not bodhisattvas, not cherry blossoms in the wind. Only crows. Over and over. Hundreds, each different. Each caught mid-flight, mid-turn, mid-stir. There were no words beneath them, no signatures, just black wings, open skies, and something in the eyes of the birds that felt human. The monk's name was Renji. At least that's what people said. He spoke to no one, until one winter morning, when a journalist from the city climbed the frozen path to his home. Her name was Aiko. She was 35, single, and worn thin by deadlines and grey apartments. She had read about Renji in a forgotten corner of an art forum, a reclusive man who paints crows with the sadness of saints. Something about that phrase struck her. She packed her camera, a notebook, and a warm coat, and made her way to Mount Hashan with the vague hope of writing something honest for once. She found the hut easily. Smoke curled from the chimney like a memory. She knocked on the wooden door, no answer. She waited then, just as she turned to leave, the door opened. A man stood there, eyes like wet stone. He was older than she expected. Or maybe time had simply carved him deeper than others. He said nothing. "I'd like to talk to you," Aiko said, bowing slightly. He looked at her, not with surprise, not with curiosity, simply looked. "I won't stay long," she added. "I just want to know why you paint crows." He stepped aside, not inviting, not refusing, just letting her in. The hut smelled of ink and pine. The walls were covered in scrolls, black birds in flight, black birds on branches, black birds looking out at something invisible. Renji sat down by the hearth and poured tea without a word. Aiko joined him. For a long time there was only the sound of wind outside and fire inside. "Most people don't like crows," she said finally. "They see what they refuse to bury," Renji said. His voice was softer than she expected, deep but not heavy. She hesitated, then asked, "What do they mean to you?" He sipped his tea. "They remember what? Everything." Aiko looked around the room. "You don't sell your work." "No, why not? They are not for looking, they are for listening." She frowned slightly. "How do you listen to a painting?" Renji stood, walked to the far wall. He lifted one scroll from its peg and brought it to her. The crow was perched on a broken bell, its wings half lifted, as if about to fly or fall. "Look here," he said, pointing to the eye. Aiko leaned in. There was something about the brushwork so precise, yet wrath that made her feel as if the crow was staring directly into her. Not accusing, not pleading, just seeing. "I painted this after my wife died," Renji said. Aiko turned to him. "I used to be a monk, long ago. Before the robes, I was a man in love. She followed me to the monastery, not as a nun, just to be. Near we lived quietly, for years." "What happened?" Aiko asked. "She became ill. We hid it from the others. Pride, perhaps, or fear. I kept painting, praying, fasting, but I did not sit beside her. I did not hold her hand. I thought devotion to the Dharma would protect us." He paused. "She died on a winter night, alone. I was copying sutras in the next room. When I found her, she was cold, and the window was open. A crow was perched on the ledge, watching." He placed the scroll back on the wall. "That crow never left," he said. "It followed me in dreams, in wind, in silence, so I painted it, again and again, until I began to see, not her death, but my absence." Aiko swallowed. Her own chest felt hollow. "Do you believe the crow was her?" she asked. "No," he said. "It was me, the part of me that watched from a distance, that chose clarity, over care, that sat beside her, but never truly with her." She nodded slowly. Renji returned to the hearth. "You did not come just for a story," he said. Aiko looked down. "No." She reached into her coat and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young boy, maybe 9, smiling next to a woman with a tired face. "My son," she said. "I lost him last year. Accident. Drowning." Renji looked at the photo. Not with pity, just presence. "I stopped writing," she said. "Everything I do feels like lying." "Then write what you cannot explain," he said. She looked up. He continued, "Grief is not a shadow. It's a companion. The longer you ignore it, the louder it knocks. But if you sit with it, pour tea for it, it may teach you how to speak." Again, they sat in silence. Then Aiko asked, "Will you teach me how to paint?" Renji looked at her for a moment. "I will teach you how to see." For the next 3 days, she stayed. No formal lessons, just quiet mornings grinding ink, quiet. Afternoons watching birds from the cliffs. At dusk, they painted, not for perfection, but for honesty. Ico's first crow looked clumsy, but in the eyes, something moved. On the 4th morning, she packed her bag at the doorway. She turned. "Do you ever stop grieving?" she asked. Renji shook his head. "But you learned to stop running from it." She bowed, "Thank you." As she walked down the mountain, the wind shifted. A single crow soared overhead, its wings outstretched, slicing the sky with memory. Back in the city. Aiko didn't return to the newspaper. She wrote something else. Something raw, a short story, about a crow that remembers every soul it has ever seen, and a woman who learns how to speak to it not with words, but with stillness. She didn't care if it was published. She only cared that it was true, sometimes. Truth is not a revelation. It's a crow staring from a scroll in a cold room, waiting for you to finally see it. Story 4. The Lantern That Never Went Out, the far end of the river market town of Shirakawa, where the mist rolled in each morning like an old habit and the night descended with a hush. there stood a small temple with cracked tiles and a leaning wooden gate. It was not a famous temple. No tourists came. The few locals who still passed by rarely entered. But every night, without fail, a single lantern glowed at its entrance, flickering gently in the dark like the breath of something still alive. No one ever saw who lit it. Some said it was a monk who refused to leave. Others said it was a ghost, but most said nothing. They were used to strange things that made no demands. Years ago, long before the silence settled in, that temple had been lively. Bells rang each morning. Children ran through the gardens. Old men came to drink tea and talk of dying with laughter in their throats. And among them all, there was one man who barely spoke, but never missed a day. His name was Goro. He was a street sweeper by day, a quiet figure with a curved back and a limp, known mostly for nodding at stray cats and collecting bits of broken pottery from the gutters. But every night, just after sunset, he would walk to the temple with an old oil lantern in hand, place it at the gate and light it. Then he would bow, sit beside it for a while, and leave without a word. He did this for 32 years, even after the temple closed its doors due to lack of monks, even after the abbot died and no one replaced him. Even after the weeds rose and the roof sagged, Goro kept coming, kept lighting the lantern. Every night, some called it devotion, others called it madness. No one ever asked him why, until one spring evening, when a young man named Sota came to the town, looking for his mother's birthplace. He was 29, a nurse from the city, weary from hospitals, loss, and noise. His mother had died a few months earlier. In her final days, she had whispered, "If you ever lose your way, go to Shirakawa. There's a temple there, with a light that doesn't go out." He thought she was delirious, but the word stayed. So he came. He found the temple easily. It wasn't marked on any map, but he followed the river upstream at dusk, and when the sky began to blush, he saw the lantern dot. An old man knelt beside it, lighting it with the slow reverence of someone tending a shrine. Sota approached. The man didn't look up. "Excuse me," Sota said, bowing slightly. "Are you the one who lights this every night?" The old man gave a slight nod. "Why?" Goro looked at the flame. "Because someone once waited for me with a light," he said. "So I do the same." Sota sat down beside him. "Who waited for you?" Goro's eyes didn't leave the lantern. "My daughter." Sota hesitated. "She lived here," Goro nodded. "A long time ago, before the fever took her." Silence passed like a boat drifting out of sight. "I was in prison when it happened," Goro said. "Not for something I did, but for something I didn't stop." Sota waited. "She was 8, Goro continued. "Her mother died when she was 3. I raised her the best I could. I worked all day, cleaned at night, barely spoke. But she never complained. She used to come to this temple with me. She loved the bell, the way it echoed." He took a deep breath. "One night, I got into a fight with a man who owed me money. He struck first. I struck last. He didn't get up." Sota frowned. "They called it manslaughter. I called it weakness. I was gone 5 years. When I returned, she was gone." Goro's eyes glistened, but before she died, she left something at the temple. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, old and worn. Sota leaned in. The letter read, "I know Papa didn't mean to go. I will wait every night with a light, so he knows the way back." She waited, Goro said, until she couldn't. He lit the lantern again, though it was already burning. "So now," he said, "I wait for her." Sota felt something inside him shift. My mother told me about this place, he said. She used to come here too, as a child. Said there was a man who lit a lantern every night. Goro turned to him, slowly, searching his face. What was her name? Mayu. Goro closed his eyes. She was kind, he said. Fed the cats. Brought me sweet rice cakes on New Year's. Sota smiled faintly. She said you once carried her home when she scraped her knee. I remember, Goro whispered. She was the first to bring flowers after my daughter died. The wind picked up. The flame flickered but did not go out. Why did she tell me to come here? Sota asked. Goro looked at him, then at the lantern. Because light stays, even when people go. That night, Sota stayed until the stars came out. He didn't ask more, didn't press. He just sat, listening to the wind and the old man's quiet breath beside the flame. When he returned to the city, he began to light a lantern each night at his window. His neighbors asked about it. He said it was for those who had lost their way. Years later, when Goro passed away, Sota came back to Shirakawa. He lit the lantern at the temple gate, and again the next night, and the next. Some said he was the son of the crow monk. Others said he was a nurse who had lost too many patients. But no one knew for sure. They only saw the light, always glowing, never asking, only waiting. Story 5. The woman in the red raincoat. The train station at Shinkai wasn't much more than a wooden platform and a vending machine humming in loneliness. Trains came twice a day, if they came at all. On most days, the crows outnumbered the passengers. That morning, under a sky the color of wet ash, a woman in a red raincoat stepped off the 613 from the city. She carried no luggage, just a small paper bag, folded carefully, and a notebook pressed against her chest as if it were a shield. Her face was unreadable, not hard, but quiet in a way that suggested she had walked through long corridors of grief and had no need for noise. Anymore, the locals watched her with brief curiosity. Strangers didn't stay long in Shinkai. The village was small, folded into the hills like a forgotten note. And even though no one spoke of it directly, everyone remembered what had happened 3 years ago. A hit and run on Route 12, a teenage boy thrown from his bicycle, dead on impact, a driver who never stopped, and a woman from the city who returned each year, always in red, always alone. She walked through the narrow lanes until she reached a small Zen center at the edge of the village. It had no name on the gate, only a weathered bell and a bamboo grove that whispered when the wind passed through. She bowed at the threshold, removed her shoes, and entered. Inside, a monk sat cross-legged by the hearth. He was middle-aged, with lines that ran from the corners of his eyes down to his jaw like rivers drawn by time. His name was Ryoshu. He didn't look up as she entered. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. "You never do this time of year." She knelt on the mat across from him. 3 years, today, I remember. She placed the paper bag beside her. It contained 2 rice balls, still warm. "You used to love these," she said. Ryoshu looked at her. "For the first time, have you eaten?" She shook her head. "Then we'll share them." They ate in silence. Afterward, she opened her notebook. Its pages were filled with names, phrases, lines crossed out and rewritten. "He would have been 17, she said softly, applying to universities, arguing about curfews. Ryoshu poured tea. "He had a name," he said. She nodded. "Kento, you never say it." I'm afraid it will disappear if I say it too often. He raised an eyebrow. Or maybe I'm afraid I'll start needing to say it more. The rain began to fall, light, steady, like a memory returning. She closed the notebook. They never found the driver, she said. They rarely do. I think I have. Ryoshu set down his cup. She continued. It was an accident. A slippery road. A blind turn. But they knew, and they drove away. You're certain? I saw them last week. At a traffic light in Kyoto. Same dent in the bumper. Same rust mark. I followed them, and I did nothing. The room grew still. I wanted to scream, she said, to drag them out of the car. But I stood there, frozen, watching them laugh. They looked normal. Ryoshu waited. I felt sick, she said, not because they got away, but because I felt sorry for them. She wiped her eyes, not angrily, but carefully, as if trying not to disturb something delicate. I came here to ask what to do. Ryoshu reached for a log and added it to the fire. When I was younger, he said, I met a woman who came to our temple every month. She always left flowers on the same stone, but there was no name on it. One day, I asked her who she was mourning. She said, my son, but he didn't die. He became someone I could no longer follow. The woman in red listened. She said something I never forgot. Ryoshu continued. Forgiveness is not releasing someone from blame. It's releasing myself from the role of their jailer. He looked at her. Do you want justice, or do you want to be free? She didn't answer. Both. He offered. She smiled faintly. I've imagined confronting them 1,000 ways, she said, but none of them make me feel better. Because pain doesn't leave through revenge, he said. It leaves through understanding. But how do I understand someone who left my child on the side of the road like trash? You don't, he said. You understand your own heart. That's all. She stared at the fire. And if my heart wants to hate them, then let it, but don't feed it. He stood, walked to the small altar, and returned with a candle. Come, he said. They walked outside, the rain soft on their shoulders. He led her down a path behind the temple to a clearing with a single stone bench. Beneath it, a small stream ran silently. This is where we release names, he said. He handed her the candle. You don't need to forgive them, he said. But you can free yourself from the question. She lit the candle. Its flame wavered in the wind. Say his name, Ryoshu said. She hesitated. Kento. She said it again, louder. Kento. And again, until her voice cracked. Until the sound became breath, and the breath became a sob, and the sob became silence. The candle held. Ryoshu knelt beside her. You carry him, he said, not in your grief, but in your love. Let that be the part that continues. She lowered the candle into the stream. It drifted away, slowly, turning in the water like a quiet star. They walked back to the temple. The rain had stopped. At the gate she turned. I don't know if I can ever forgive. You don't have to, Ryoshu said, but you can choose not to continue their mistake. How? By not abandoning yourself. That night, she stayed in the guest room. She did not dream. In the morning, she left the red raincoat on the gate, took the train, returned to the city. She kept the notebook, but she no longer crossed out his name, Kento, each time she wrote it. Her hands trembled a little less, and when she passed the intersection where the car had stopped trusted bumper, familiar Denchi no longer followed. She didn't need to. The path was no longer behind her. It was forward, And though it rained again that day, she walked without the coat, letting the sky touch her, without fear, without armor, only presence, only love. Story 6. The pebble under her pillar. The village of Ikano curved around a lake so still that locals claimed it remembered every face that had ever leaned over it. In spring, the petals of plum blossoms floated on the surface like old letters, never opened. In autumn, fog lay thick across the water, hiding the houses until they seemed to drift like boats without anchors. Near the lake's edge lived a girl named Hannah. She was 17, but there was something quiet and ancient in her eyes, as if she'd been watching the world from behind a glass window her whole life. She hardly spoke at school. At home, she answered with nods. Her friends, what few she had said, she was kind but far away. Someone walking through fog that no one else could see. What they didn't know was that Hannah hadn't slept properly. In over 2 years, each night she lay still in her room, lights off, heart pounding, mind replaying a voice that had long stopped calling her name. That voice belonged to her best friend, Amy. Amy, who had taken her own life in the winter of their second year of middle school. Amy, who had left no note, no warning, no goodbye, just silence. After her death, Hannah stopped drawing. They used to sketch together by the lake, making up stories about the swans, the reeds, the clouds. Hannah still carried one of their shared sketchbooks in her bag, but hadn't opened it in months. On the anniversary of Amy's death, Hannah did not go to school. Instead, she walked along the lake until her shoes were damp with dew and the wind turned cold. She passed the shrine where people left offerings for lost children. She passed the old train station with no trains. At last, she sat beneath the cherry tree where she and Amy had once carved their initials. The bark had grown over the letters now, healing without erasing. Hannah took a deep breath. I still don't understand, she said aloud, and I'm tired of asking. She took off her shoes, pressed her bare feet into the grass, and closed her eyes. That was when she heard the footsteps, slow, measured, not heavy. She opened her eyes, an old woman. In a grey kimono stood a few meters away, holding a bundle of herbs and a walking stick made of bamboo. Her face was soft, but sharp like the moon behind thin clouds. Mind if I join you? The woman asked. Hannah shrugged. The woman sat down beside her. I used to come here with my sister, she said. We were both in love with the same man. He chose neither of us. So we grew old together, laughing at our own foolishness. Hannah said nothing. The woman turned to her. I know who you are. Hannah looked away. Your heart's heavy, the woman said. So heavy, you stopped carrying yourself. Hannah blinked. Her throat burned, but she didn't cry. I'm not a fortune teller, the woman added. Just someone who remembers pain. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small object, a pebble, smooth, grey, with a single white line running through it like a scar. This was under my sister's pillow when she died, she said. I thought it was nothing. Then I found her journal. She wrote, every night I place this pebble under my pillow to remind myself that even the hardest things soften in time. She handed the pebble to Hannah. It won't fix anything, she said, but it can sit with you. Sometimes that's enough. Hannah took it. The woman stood, bowed, and walked away. That night, Hannah placed the pebble beneath her pillow. She didn't expect dreams, but they came dawn in one. She and Amy sat at the lake again. Only this time, Amy was silent. Not because she was gone, but because she was listening. In the dream, Hannah spoke for the first time. I was angry, she said. You should have told me. You should have let me carry some of it. Amy looked at her. No sorrow, just softness. I did, she said, but you didn't know how. When Hannah woke, her pillow was damp with tears she hadn't remembered. Crying, she reached under and touched the pebble. In the weeks that followed, she began walking more, drawing again, quietly at first, a crow by the water, a shadow on a wall. Her lines were hesitant, but they moved. At school, she answered questions. Again, not always, but sometimes. One afternoon, she stayed late in the art room. A boy from her class, Takashi, sat across from her. He was painting clouds. Why do you always draw in black ink? He asked. She looked at her sketch pad. Because even black has texture, she said. It's not empty. He nodded, then said, I heard about your friend. She didn't respond. He added, my brother died last year. He was 21, motorcycle accident. Hannah looked up. Takashi smiled faintly. I thought I'd never stop feeling that hole in my chest. But then I realized something. What? It wasn't a hole. It was a shape. And it belonged to him. I didn't need to fill it. Just learn how to carry it. She looked at her pebble. That night, Hannah opened the sketchbook she had shared with Amy. The last page they had drawn together was half finished. A girl on a swing. A sky without clouds. She picked up her brush and added a moon. Then a pebble beneath the swing. Then a hand, reaching not to hold, but to sit beside. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. The pebble still lay under her pillow, not as a cure, but as a witness. And every night, as she rested her head, she remembered the woman's words. Even the hardest things soften in time, especially the ones we dare to touch. Story 7. Tea with a murderer. The tea house sat at the edge of the city, half swallowed by ivy, half forgotten by time. It had once been part of a Zen garden, belonging to a monastery that had burned down long ago. Now it served as a quiet retreat for those who still sought something more than caffeine. There was no sign, no menu, no electricity, only candles, old tatami mats, and the scent of roasted barley lingering in the air. The woman who ran it was called Sister Kaoru, though she wore no robes. She was neither nun nor lay person, just a quiet presence in a white kimono with hair like river stones. She brewed tea the same way every time. Water at 79 degrees, poured in spirals, served without question. No one ever asked her. Passed, and she never asked theirs, until one day a man arrived who brought the past with him. He was in his early 50s, clean jacket, neatly trimmed beard, eyes like polished wood opaque. Still, he bowed when he entered, removed his shoes, sat in the farthest corner where a lone candle flickered beside a wooden column carved with plum blossoms. Sister Kaoru greeted him with the same words she always used. Would you like silence with your tea or conversation? The man looked at her for a long moment, then replied, May I have both? She nodded. He said nothing else for a while. She brewed the tea. The sound of boiling water echoed softly through the room like distant rain. The air held the scent of chamomile and matcha. When she placed the cup before him, he bowed slightly and said, I killed a man 29 years ago. Kaoru paused. He looked at the tea. I've never said it aloud, not even in court. She sat across from him, legs folded beneath her. Her face remained calm. Was it murder? She asked. The man didn't flinch. Yes, he sipped the tea. waited. I was 23, poor, angry, the kind of angry that doesn't know its grief. I worked nights, drank too much. One day, I saw my girlfriend laughing with someone else. I followed the man, cornered him in an alley. I didn't plan to kill him, but I didn't stop either. My hands wouldn't stop. He set the cup down. I turned myself in the next morning. You served time, 18 years. Parole after 15. Kaoru looked at him gently. And after that, I changed my name, moved far, became a carpenter, built chairs for old people. I never forgot. I never asked for forgiveness. I didn't think I deserved it. Why now? She asked. He looked up, because yesterday I saw the victims. Mother, she was sitting in the park feeding sparrows. She looked tired, but peaceful. I wanted to kneel before her and beg, but I didn't move. I stood there for 10 minutes. Then I walked away, came here. Kaoru poured more tea. Do you want forgiveness? She asked. I want to stop punishing myself in silence. Then speak, she said. He hesitated. I still remember the warmth of his blood on my hands, the sound of his ribs cracking. I was a monster. No, she said. You were a man in pain who mistook his suffering for power. He blinked. The worst crimes, she continued, are not born from evil. They are born from despair we refuse to name. He lowered his head. I wake up every night at 3, he said. Same dream, the alley, his face. But each time, he looks more like me. Kaoru nodded slowly. That's not guilt. That's recognition. You are not separate from what you did. But you are also not only that. He looked at her. Do you believe in redemption? I believe in presence, she said. In facing what we bury, that is the first step. Redemption is not forgetting. It's becoming the one who can hold the memory with tenderness. He wiped his eyes. Kaoru reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small folded cloth. Inside it was a white pebble. She placed it in front of him. Take it, she said. Place it in your left pocket. Every time you feel the weight of the past, touch it. Remind yourself, I am still here, and I can choose who I am now. He stared at the pebble. Will it erase what I did? He asked. No, she said, but it may help you stop bleeding inside. He took the pebble with both hands. As he rose to leave, he bowed deeply. Kaoru did not bow in return. She simply said, Come back next week. The tea is different in autumn. He smiled, faintly. When the door closed behind him, Kaoru sat in silence. She reached into her own sleeve and pulled out a matching pebble. Held it in her palm and remembered her brother, the one who had died in a similar alley, the one whose killer had never been found. She placed the pebble on the table, then poured herself a cup of tea and whispered, Still, I choose to stay. Outside the ivy, our UST led. Inside, the candle danced, and for a little while, the past sat quietly in the corner, no longer screaming. Story 8. When the bell stopped ringing every morning at 5 o'clock, for as long as anyone could remember, the great bronze bell of Toran Temple rang once to greet the day. The sound travelled far beyond the hills, across rice paddies and bamboo groves, reaching even the fishermen on the distant lake. People said it was a sound that made your soul stand still for a moment, just to listen. It marked the beginning of the world, again and again. Then, one morning, it didn't ring. At first, the villagers thought it was a mistake. Perhaps the monk had overslept. But by the third morning, worry turned into whispers. Some said the abbot had died. Others said the temple had been cursed. Children stopped playing near the temple walls. Vendors at the morning market found their fruit spoiled too quickly. Old men in the tea shop looked into their cups with furrowed brows. The truth, however, was simpler and heavier. The abbot, Reverend Segan, was alive, but he had not touched the bell since the day he received a letter. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, written in neat but shaky hand. He read it once, twice, then folded it and placed it beneath the altar. That night he did not sleep, and the next morning he did not ring the bell. Inside the letter was a name he had not spoken in 37 years. Kyoshi, the boy he once called his brother. They had grown up together in a coastal village, the sons of two poor families who had shared rice, hardship, and laughter. Segan had joined the monastery at 16. Kyoshi had gone to the city to become a teacher. They promised to write, but distance, then time, then silence grew between them, until that letter arrived. "I am dying," Kyoshi wrote. "I don't want anything. Only to hear the bell again, if you're still ringing it. I want to believe the sound will carry to where I am." There was no address, no way to reply. Segan sat in front of the bell the next morning, mallet in hand, unable to move. His hands trembled. He remembered the last time they had seen each other on the cliff above the sea. Kyoshi had shouted, furious, tears running down his face. "You chose silence over me," he had said. "I chose the path," Segan had replied. But now he wondered if that path had simply been a form of escape. That morning, a young novice named Sora approached. Sora had only been at the temple for a year. Quiet, diligent, gentle with the garden. "Reverend," Sora said softly, "the village is waiting." Segan did not look at him, then let them wait. Sora hesitated, then bowed and left. That night, rain fell. The bell tower creaked in the wind. Segan sat beneath it, his robes damp, the letter in his lap. The bell is not just a sound Kyoshi had written. It's memory made solid. When it rings, it reminds me that time hasn't won yet. By the 5th day, the village sent a representative to the temple. Her name was Aya, a retired schoolteacher who had visited the bell each year on her birthday since she was 7. She climbed the stone steps in the morning fog, a thermos of tea in hand, and found Segan already sitting there. "Unmoving." She sat beside him. "No bell today?" she asked gently. He shook his head. She poured tea into 2 small cups. Steam rose between them like a breath unspoken. "I used to think that bell was magic," she said. "When I was little, I believed it made the sun rise." Segan closed his eyes. "And now?" he asked. "I think it tells us the world is still listening," she said, "even if we are not." Segan said nothing. Aya stood to leave. Before she did, she looked at him and said, "Even silence has a sound, Reverend, but it's a sound of turning away." That night, Sora returned to the bell tower after evening sutras. He found the abbot cleaning the bell, slowly wiping the green patina with a cloth soaked in warm vinegar. He didn't speak, just watched. Finally, Segan said, "Do you know what this bell was originally made for?" Sora shook his head. Feudal lord had it cast to announce executions. One deep tone before the sword. Sora looked startled. Segan smiled, though his eyes were heavy. But when the temple acquired it centuries later, they changed its purpose. One tone to begin the day, to wake not fear, but awareness. He placed the cloth aside. "But a bell is only what the hand intends," he said. That night, Segan didn't sleep. He went to the altar, retrieved Kiyoshi's letter, and unfolded it again. The paper had begun to wear thin at the creases. He stared at the handwriting for a long time. Then he wrote a reply on a separate sheet of rice paper. "Dear Kiyoshi, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if time allows such things. But tomorrow at dawn, I will ring the bell, once for you, once for us, once for the silence that lasted too long." The next morning, the village awoke to birdsong, mist, and the distant hush of water wheels turning. People opened their shutters slowly, uncertain. Then they heard it. One long, deep tone. It rang not like a command, but like a memory remembered. Then another, this one softer, as if meant not for the world, but for one set of ears only. In his hospital bed in a city far away, a man named Kiyoshi lay motionless, tubes running from his arms, breath thin. But for a moment, just a moment, his eyes opened, he smiled. Then the third ring, and then nothing more. Back at the temple, Segan placed the mallet down and bowed to the bell. He remained there a long time. Sora approached him later with warm water for his hands. "Will we ring it again tomorrow?" he asked. Segan looked up at the sky. "No," he said, "you will." And from that day forward, the bell rang again every morning, just once. Not because of tradition, but because someone, somewhere, might be listening, even now. Story 9. The Lantern That Never Burned Out. In a quiet village, nestled in the folds of forested hills, there lived a man named Haru, who kept a single lantern burning outside his home. It had become a part of the village, that dim orange glow always lit, regardless of rain, wind, or snow. It was known as the Eternal Lantern, and though no one quite knew why Haru kept it burning, no one questioned it either. It was simply ... there. Haru was a simple man, silent most days. He grew his own vegetables, fetched water from the stream with a wooden pail, and sat for hours on his porch watching the fog roll over the treetops like waves on the ocean. Children whispered stories about him. Some said he was a spirit in disguise. Others believed he was waiting for someone. But none dared ask, for Haru had the kind of stillness that made people quiet around him, not out of fear, but out of reverence. One day a young monk named Sogen came into the village, carrying nothing but a cloth sack and a walking stick. He was on a pilgrimage of silence, as prescribed by his master, and had not spoken a word in 99 days. His journey was to last 100. He had spent nights under temple roofs, in caves with bats, on the edge of cliffs where the wind howled like wolves, but never had he seen a lantern burn like Haru's that evening, when the sky wore its deepest indigo and crickets tuned their tiny violins in the grass. Sargon stopped before Haru's house. The lantern glowed soft and alive, yet it gave off no heat. The monk raised his hand in a respectful bow. Haru, who had been shelling peas by the door, looked up and nodded. Without a word, he stood, swept aside the bamboo mat, and gestured for the monk to sit. So they sat, two men, one lantern, and an ocean of silence between them. Night passed like a drifting cloud. The monk watched the flame, and Haru watched the monk. Morning arrived on the breath of dew, and with it, Sogen bowed again, stood, and left. He had completed his vow of silence, but something gnawed at his heart. Days later, with his voice now restored, Sargon returned. He approached Haru and asked the question that had clung to his ribs like a whisper in the dark. Why do you keep the lantern burning?" Haru, who rarely spoke, looked up with eyes that had waited a long time for someone to ask. "I once had a son," he said. The words were simple, but the weight of them hung like frost on a winter leaf. He was born during the harvest season, laughed often, danced when he ate rice. He would run barefoot through the barley fields with a reed flute and frighten crows just to watch them scatter. His mother died young, and it was just the two of us for many years. Haru's voice held no tremble, just presence. One day, he left to seek wisdom in the mountains. Said he would return in 3 years. That was 25 winters ago. Sogan looked at the lantern. "He gave me this lantern when he left. Keep it lit," he told me, "so I can find my way home, no matter how dark the world becomes." "And so you waited?" Sogan asked softly. "No," Haru said. "I learned to live." The monk was puzzled. "Then why keep it lit?" Haru smiled faintly. "Because even if he never returns, there should always be light somewhere in the world that says, 'You are welcome.'" That evening Sargon asked if he could stay the night. Haru agreed. Together they made miso soup with seaweed and tofu, and the lantern glowed as they ate in silence. Years passed. Sogan built a small hermitage near the village. He became the villagers' quiet listener. When someone lost a father or a child wept for their mother, they came to him not for answers, but to be held by his silence. One day, a traveler came to the village. His beard was overgrown, his clothes in tatters. He walked with a limp and carried an old flute carved from reed. Children scattered at first, but he smiled with eyes that remembered barley fields. That night, the lantern flickered strangely. For the first time in decades, the door to Haru's home was opened wide. Voices echoed, one soft with age, one trembling with return. Tears fell on tatami mats. The flame danced. The traveler stayed only 3 days. On the 4th, he left again, this time with peace in his gait. Haru never said where he went, only that some rivers must flow before they can return as rain. But from that day on, the lantern remained burning, not from hope or habit, but as a gift. It was no longer for the son who might return, but for any soul wandering in darkness, the sick, the grieving, the lost. Anyone needing light, villagers, began placing small stones around the lantern, tokens of gratitude, of memory. It became a place people visited in silence. No prayer spoken aloud, no incense burned, just a moment of breath beneath its glow. One autumn evening, many years later, Haru passed away in his sleep. His body was found seated upright on the porch, a small smile on his lips, palms resting on his knees. The lantern still burned beside him. Sogan was the one to tend to the rites. He cleaned the body, wrapped it in white linen, and lit a stick of pine-scented wood, not as incense, but as memory. That night the entire village sat round the lantern. No one spoke. The stars leaned in close, and the flame did not go out. Years have passed since then. The house has been rebuilt as a place of quiet reflection. The lantern still burns. Children no longer whisper about Haru being a spirit. They know better now. He was a man who understood that light, once offered freely, has no owner, just visitors. Story 10. The monk and the broken roof. The storm arrived not with thunder, but with silence. High in the eastern hills, where mist clung to the pine branches like forgotten breath, the old monastery stood, its tiled roofs weathered by decades of wind and rain. In the meditation hall, a leak had opened in the roof. a slow, persistent drip that fell directly onto the wooden floor, soaking the planks with each beat. The monks said nothing about it. For 3 days, they continued their sitting practice, the sound of the dripping water like a metronome marking impermanence. Only when the puddle threatened to reach the altar did the abbot call for the novice monk Jun to climb and inspect the damaged. Jun was 17. His robes were always a little crooked, and he walked with the slight impatience of youth, but his eyes were earnest and bright. When the abbot summoned him, he bowed deeply. "Yes, master." "The roof leaks," the abbot said. "It is your practice to observe it." "Observe it?" Jun echoed, a little confused. The abbot did not clarify. He only handed Jun a folded cloth and pointed toward the ladder resting against the rear wall. Jun climbed. The wind was sharp on the roof. Clouds crawled above like slow thoughts. Jun found the hole easily, a missing tile, perhaps torn loose by the last gust. He sat cross-legged beside it, staring down at the exposed wood, the sky beyond it, the way the wind funneled through. He waited. He watched. He remembered the abbot's words, "Observe it." For 2 hours he sat there. No insight came. Eventually, cold and hunger drove him down. That evening, during tea, Jun approached the abbot again. "Master, I observed the hole as you instructed, but I don't understand. Should I not repair it?" The abbot poured tea into his cup, the steam curling upward like incense. "Tell me, Jun, what did you learn?" Jun hesitated. "Only that the wind is stronger at that height, and that the sky is larger when you look at it from the roof." The abbot smiled. "That is a start." The next morning, the drip continued. Jun went back up, this time bringing a small piece of rice paper. He placed it gently over the hole, then sat back again. The wind blew the paper away almost immediately. On the 3rd day, he brought a pebble to weigh it down. Still, the rain came through, soaking the paper, dissolving it. He repeated this process, bringing cloth, leaves, even clay, and each time the wind or water unraveled his efforts. Jun's frustration began to grow. Why not just fix the roof? He asked Brother Hui, an older monk with kind eyes and a limp from a childhood illness. Brother Hui was sweeping fallen needles in the courtyard. "Is that what you believe the abbot asked you to do?" Jun opened his mouth, then closed it. Brother Hui leaned on his broom. "When I was your age, I too was asked to observe something broken. In my case, a cracked bell. I wanted to fix it. Instead, I listened to its flawed sound every morning. I grew to love it more than the pure chime it once had." That night, as the rain came again, Jun sat on the floor of the hall, watching the puddle grow. The other monks sat in stillness. The drip now echoed in his mind like a question, or maybe an answer he didn't yet understand. What was the purpose of letting something broken remain? In the quiet, he thought of his father's anger, the reason he came to the monastery, how easily things shattered, how the world tried to mend them with silence or denial or ritual. Maybe the abbot wasn't interested in the roof. Maybe he was pointing to something else. The next morning, Jun returned to the roof with nothing, no tools, no materials, just his breath. He sat again. This time, he listened to the wind not as an obstacle, but as part of the roof's breath. He watched a bird land on the beam. He let go of the idea of repair. He just sat, as the abbot had taught him in all things. After several hours, the abbot himself climbed the ladder. He stood behind Jun silently for a moment. Then he said, "You have observed well." Jun didn't turn around. "Should I fix it?" "Now, that is up to you," said the abbot. Jun smiled faintly. "Then I think... not yet." In the following weeks, the drip continued. But the monks moved their mats slightly and meditated around it. Some even said the sound helped them let go more easily. The puddle never reached the altar again, and slowly Jun began to understand that not all broken things demanded repair. Some invited companionship. One day a visitor came, a carpenter traveling through the region. He offered to fix the roof in exchange for a night's stay. The abbot agreed. The next morning the leak was gone. The hall was quieter, but strangely, Jun missed the sound. That evening he went to the abbot. "Master," he said, "I think I finally understand. The leak was never about the hole, it was about me." The abbot nodded, pouring tea. "Tell me," Jun spoke slowly. "In trying to fix what was broken, I resisted it. I struggled, but when I stopped resisting, when I just sat with it, became a teacher, not an error." The abbot set down the teapot. "We cannot stop the rain, Jun, and not every roof can be sealed. But we can sit beneath the dripping and learn how to remain dry within." Jun bowed deeply. The next morning, he asked to observe the bell. It had a new crack now, and a new sound. And in that imperfect note, Jun heard the beginning of another lesson. Story 11. The paper boat and the river in a village wrapped in mist each morning, where rice paddies glistened like silver sheets and the river flowed as gently as breath. There lived a boy named An. An was neither remarkable nor unremarkable. He was simply a boy who listened more than he spoke and watched more than he ran. His parents worked the fields, bending under the sun with the quiet discipline passed down through generations, while Anne wandered the edges of their world, where the grass met the sky. What set him apart, perhaps, was the river dot each morning before his chores. He would sit by its bank and fold a paper boat. He had learned the folding from an old monk who once passed through the village during a drought. The monk had whispered, "Every crease is a thought. Every fold is an intention. Be mindful. Even a small boat can carry a prayer." So Anne folded carefully. He used scraps of newspaper, discarded receipts, the backs of rice invoices. Then, gently, he would place the paper boat in the river and watch it drift, whispering a wish he never spoke aloud. Some days he wished for rain. Other days he wished his mother's cough would disappear. But often he simply wished to understand. One afternoon, after a heavy monsoon, the river was swollen and fast. The water had turned from its usual pale brown to a fierce grey, and its sound roared against the stones. Anne, standing barefoot on the muddy bank, hesitated with the boat in his hands. "Why do you keep doing this?" His cousin Min called from behind. Min was older, proud, and full of practical advice. "They always sink, always disappear. It's a waste of paper, a waste of time." Anne didn't answer. He bent down, laid the boat on the rushing surface, and watched it spin, tilt, then sail. For a moment, it stayed afloat, and then the river claimed it. That one went farther. Anne said quietly. Min rolled his eyes and walked off. That night, Anne dreamed of the river, but it wasn't water. It was made of paper boats, 1,000 of them, carrying voices, memories, laughter, and sorrow. Each boat lit softly from within. They were floating not on water but through sky. And at the center of it all stood the old monk, silent and smiling. The next morning, Anne returned to the river. The waters had calmed. He had no paper. Instead, he just sat. Across from him, a figure emerged, a stranger, cloaked and barefoot, with eyes that seemed to carry whole lifetimes. The man sat beside him without speaking. After a while, Anne turned and asked, "Have you ever sent a boat?" The man nodded slowly. "Many. Some never reached their shore. Some sank before I let go, but one returned." Anne's eyes widened. "Boats don't return." "They do," the man said, "but not always in the way you expect." There was silence, not heavy, but open. The man continued, "Once, I sent a boat with a question. What does it mean to be enough? For years, I sought the answer from teachers, scriptures, mountains, and fasting. Then one day, I sat by the river with nothing. No boat, no paper, no question, just breath, and that was the answer." Anne looked down at the water. "Is it always like that?" "The answer is nothing." The man shook his head. "The answer is everything, once you're quiet enough to hear." They sat until the sun touched the horizon. Then the man stood and said, "Keep sending your boats, child. But know that the river does not need to reply with words. It replies with movement, with letting go, with change." The next weeks passed, as they always had. The village planted, harvested, worried about prices and pests, and folded his boats. Sometimes he wrote on them just a single word. One said, "Patience." One said, "Mother." One simply had the word, "Why?" Then, one day, his mother collapsed in the field. The village rushed. The healer came. There was boiling water, crushed roots, chanting. But her breathing became thin, like thread through a needle. Anne sat by her mat, boat in hand. "I don't want to lose her," he whispered. "She isn't yours to lose," the healer said softly. "No one is ever ours, not even ourselves." That night Anne sat by the river under a moon so full it pulled tides from dreams. He didn't fold a boat. He didn't speak. He just sat. The river did not comfort him. It did not cradle or console. But it didn't turn away. In the days that followed, his mother remained between. She did not rise, but she did not go. Then, one morning, Anne awoke to her voice calling faintly for tea. She recovered slowly. Her cough remained but softened. Her laughter came back in smaller ripples, and Anne continued to visit the river. Years passed. Anne grew. He began helping more in the fields, carrying sacks of rice on his thin back, his feet knowing every curve of the land. But every now and then, when the sun hung low and the breeze teased the surface of the water, he would sit by the bank, folding. One morning, a girl from the next village came by the river, carrying a broken basket. She saw Anne release a paper boat and asked, "What are you doing?" He smiled, asking. She laughed. "What are you asking?" He looked out. Everything. She stayed beside him until the boat was out of sight. Then she said, "Can I fold one too?" And so he showed her, crease by crease. From then on, others came. Children, elders, travelers. They folded. They whispered. They watched. No one explained the practice. No one named it. But soon, a small wooden box sat under a tree near the river, filled with blank paper, and next to it, a sign, "Fold with care. Release with love." Decades later, Anne, now old and grey, with hands shaped by work and weather, sat beside a child by the same river. The child asked, "Do they always float away?" "Some do," and said, and some float back inside us. The child looked confused but didn't press. Anne folded a final boat, this one out of golden rice paper gifted by a monk who once came in a drought. Placed it on the water, whispered a word only the river could understand, and watched it drift as it disappeared around the bend. He closed his eyes and felt, in the deepest quiet, the answer return, and the river, as always, kept moving. Story 12. The weaver of emptiness, seen the high mountains of a forgotten land, nestled among sharp cliffs and cloud-kissed peaks. There lived an old weaver named Lin Mo. His small wooden hut overlooked the valley like a solitary eye observing the world below. The villagers spoke little of Lin Mo, save for whispers during market days. He never comes down. He weaves only in silence. They say his cloths have no thread. No one truly understood what Lin Mo did. His house never emitted smoke, nor did any dyed fabrics hang from its porch. Yet once every season, a villager would find at the temple gate a parcel wrapped in grey linen, weightless, translucent, humming softly with something more than fabric. It was said these garments healed grief, stilled anger, and made the wearer feel like wind, unseen, untouched, free. One autumn morning, a young man named Zun, weary from a long journey across many provinces, climbed the path to Lin Mo's dwelling. Zun had been a soldier, once noble, now broken. He carried in his pack a heart heavy with war, a blade dulled by regret, and the ashes of a fallen friend. The war had ended, but the noise within him never did. When he arrived at the hut, knocked thrice. Silence replied. He knocked again, this time with the hilt of his sword. Finally, the door creaked open, not from within, but by the wind behind him. Lin Mo stood by the loom, his back straight despite his years, his hands in motion though the shuttle passed through nothingness. "You've come a long way," Lin Mo said without turning. "Not for a cloth, but for an unraveling." Zun hesitated. "I seek a garment of peace." "There is no such garment," Lin Mo replied, his voice the sound of wind on bark. "But there is weaving. Sit." The hut was bare. No food, no fire, no shelves, only the loom and a single cushion opposite it. Zun sat. He expected questions, rituals, something ceremonial. Instead, Lin Mo continued weaving, emptiness, threads not seen, patterns not visible. Zun watched. Hours passed. Sun crept across the floor, and still Lin Mo worked in silence. The young man began to fidget, his mind swirling. "You are weaving nothing," he finally said. Lin Mo looked up. "No, I am weaving what you brought. I brought nothing. You brought restlessness, sorrow, the weight of others' deaths, your own name carved into too many tombstones. You brought the echo of war. I weave that." Zun grew angry. "Is this a game? I came seeking healing, not riddles." Lin Mo stood, slowly, like a crane lifting from a pond. He walked outside. Confused but compelled, Zun followed. They stood on a ledge above the valley. Clouds hung low, swallowing the forest beneath. "Do you see the clouds?" asked Lin Mo. "They pass, but they touch nothing. They move, but they are not moved. They hold water, yet are never heavy." "What are they?" Zun replied. "Mist, vapor, illusion. Then why do they weep upon the earth?" He had no answer. Lin Mo continued. "The clouds carry sorrow as you do. They release what they cannot keep. You, however, grasp what must pass. You collect names. Faces, screams, memories, but none are you. I remember them because I loved them, Zun said. No, the weaver answered. You remember them because you do not love yourself. The words pierced like arrows. Z staggered. No one had ever spoken to him that way. Not the monks, not the generals, not even his dying brother in arms. What do I do then? Zuin asked, voice low. Weave, Zuin returned to the hut. Lin Mo showed him the loom. For days, weeks, perhaps months, time lost meaning. Zuin passed invisible shuttles through the frame, watched as his sorrow was bound into the threads of nothingness. Each motion became a prayer, each silence a bomb. He dreamt less. He spoke. Not at all. He began to feel the warmth of the wind again, the sound of rain as something gentle. His hands, once made for killing, now moved like reeds in water. One day, Lin Mo placed a folded robe into his hands. It was colorless, like dew at dawn, and lighter than breath. It is not to be worn, Lin Mo said. It is to be remembered. Zun nodded. What is it called? The garment of emptiness. He left that day without a farewell. The clouds parted for him. Years passed. In the southern province of Chenling, a traveler arrived at a village in mourning. A storm had taken many lives. Despair blanketed the town like fog. The traveler, older now, calm like stone, went to the temple and left behind a folded cloth of silence. The next morning, the villagers gathered. Upon touching the garment, the children ceased weeping. The old felt their backs straighten. The widow found her voice again, and though the cloth was soon taken by wind, its stillness remained. They asked who the traveler was. The monk at the gate said only, he weaves what he once carried. Story 13. The mirror in the rain inn, a modest village veiled by the arms of pine-covered hills, where mornings emerged wrapped in fog and evenings whispered with cricket songs, there lived an old woman named Yua Khan. She ran a mirror shop unlike any other. Her shop was small, tucked beneath a bent cherry blossom tree whose petals never seemed to fall, even in winter. Travelers called her the Lady of Reflections, though none could explain exactly why. Yuokan sold no ordinary mirrors. Each one was crafted from polished bronze, hand-shaped over weeks of silent labor. But more than their beauty, what made these mirrors strange was that they never showed a person's face, only their emotions. If a man stood before a mirror, he might see sorrow curling like smoke where his eyes should be. A woman in love might find her heart fluttering in the bronze glass, though her face was nowhere to be seen. Some people returned the mirrors in fear. Some kept them for life, hanging them not on walls, but near windows, where they caught the rain. One spring, a boy named Wei arrived at Yuakin's doorstep. He had walked barefoot from the neighboring province, carrying only a small cloth bundle and a wound in his heart no doctor could see. His mother had died during childbirth. His father, lost in gambling, had sold their home and disappeared into the north. Wei had wandered from temple to temple, city to city, asking monks, merchants, and mystics the same question. Why do I feel empty even when I try to be good? No one answered. They gave him food, and some gave him scripture. None touched the void he carried. When he stumbled into Yuakin's shop, he did not speak. He merely looked at the mirrors. Some glowed faintly in his presence. Others darkened. Yuakan, who had lived through 7 wars and countless funerals, saw in his silence not the stubbornness of youth, but the ache of a child who had no language for his grief. Sit, she said. He obeyed. For the next 3 days, Wei said nothing. Yuakan served him rice porridge each morning and let him sleep by the hearth at night. He spent hours watching. The mirrors. He would stand in front of one, then another, then crouch in the corner and weep without sound. Finally, on the 4th day, he spoke. "Why do your mirrors show what I hide from even myself?" Yuakan stirred her tea. "They don't show what is hidden. They show what refuses to be hidden." Wei clenched his fists. "But why? Why should I see these things? Isn't it better to forget?" She met his eyes with a gaze soft as ash. "Forgetting is not healing. Healing is remembering with peace." He trembled. "I don't know how to do that." Yuakan nodded. "Then let me show you the mirror that remembers for you." From behind the counter, she brought out a cloth-wrapped frame. It was larger than the others, and its edges bore carvings of rivers, birds, and tree symbols, of things that moved but never begged to be seen. She unwrapped it gently, as if it contained breath. "This mirror does not reveal emotions," she said. "It shows your story, but not in words or images. It reflects through the rain." Wei blinked. "What do you mean, you must place it outside during the rain? Watch it as it watches you. Then come back inside and sit in silence. Do not chase what you see. Let it come to you." It rained that evening. Wei sat cross-legged before the mirror, now propped beneath the eaves of the cherry blossom tree. The rain struck its surface not with droplets, but with echoes. Each drop shimmered into ripples that revealed moments from his past not visually, but as sensations. The feeling of hunger the day his father left, the warmth of his mother's hands, though he'd never seen her face, the cold floor of the orphanage in the mountain town, the strange, sharp sweetness of stolen persimmons, the bitterness of being ignored by monks too busy to care. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but not from pain. It was the first time his story had been honored not as something to be fixed, not as something to be pitied, but as something that simply was. When the rain ceased, so did the mirror's ripples. It became still, showing neither reflection nor distortion, only space. Yuakan came and placed a shawl over his shoulders. "Do you understand now why you felt empty?" Wei nodded, slowly. "I thought I had no story, but it was always there. I just didn't know how to listen." She smiled, a smile so quiet it could have been a breath. "You listened to the rain. Now listen to yourself." Over the weeks that followed, Wei stayed and helped her polish the mirrors. He became her apprentice, though she never called him that. Instead, she said, "You are not here to learn from me. You are here to remember what you already know." Years passed. Yuakan grew older, thinner, quieter. One winter morning, she did not rise from her bed. Wei sat beside her, holding her hand. Her final words were not dramatic. They were simple. "Polish the silence. Let it speak." After her passing, villagers expected the shop to close, but it did not. Wei remained. He made no new mirrors, but continued tending to the old ones. Those who came found the mirrors gentler, more forgiving. And now a new one stood at the entrance, an empty bronze plate beneath a sign carved with a single word, "Rain." When children asked him what it meant, he would say, "Sometimes the only mirror we need is a sky that weeps for us." And the cherry blossom tree continued to bloom, never losing a petal. Story 14. The man who sat by the rivulet was on the outskirts of a quiet village, where the trees bowed to the wind and the sky never hurried to change. That a man named Haruto made his home. His house was a simple wooden cabin beside the flowing Kamari River, which wrapped itself gently around the foot of the mountain like a silk scarf laid by a loving hand. Haruto was neither monk nor merchant, neither scholar nor sage. To the world, he was merely a man who sat by the river. He would rise each morning with the first breath of dawn, wash his hands in the cool waters, and sit on a smooth stone that had been worn flat by years of stillness. He said nothing to passers-by, but they all noticed him. Children would point and giggle, farmers would nod respectfully, travelers would pause, half curious, half confused, then move on, unsure if he was mad or enlightened. No one truly knew his story, not even the village elders who had seen him sitting there since their youth. Some said he had once been a soldier who left the battlefield and never returned. Others believed he had lost someone dear and had come to the river to find what was taken. The truth was quieter than either tale and far more difficult to explain. One day, a scholar from the city visited the village, searching for someone to guide him in the path of Zen. His name was Koji, and his robes were clean, his voice precise, his books stacked high in his satchel. He had studied under many teachers, memorized sutras, debated with monks, and yet his heart remained burdened, like a well with no bucket to draw its water. The villagers, unsure how to answer his questions, pointed toward the man by the river. Koji approached Haruto respectfully and waited, but Haruto neither looked nor moved. Only the river answered, a soft murmuring over stones. "I seek wisdom," Koji said, bowing. "They say you are a man of deep understanding." Haruto said nothing. "I have read much," Koji continued, "but knowledge alone has not brought me peace. I came hoping you could teach me." Still, Haruto did not speak. Koji hesitated, then sat beside him, watching the river flow. After a long silence, Koji said, "You do not teach with words." Haruto finally looked at him, his gaze gentle, and spoke for the first time. "The river has been speaking to you since you arrived." Koji frowned. "I hear only water." Haruto nodded. "Then that is enough for today." Puzzled, Koji returned the next morning, and the next, sitting beside Haruto as the river sang its endless song. He tried to hear more than water, tried to sense some hidden message, some cryptic lesson between the ripples, but all he heard was the river. When he asked questions, Haruto only pointed to the flow. On the 5th day, Koji grew frustrated. "I have learned nothing. Is this your lesson, that I must give up words and become like Usalant?" Haruto turned to him, not in anger, but with a look of deep compassion. "The river does not speak to be heard," he said. "It speaks because it flows." Koji blinked. "I don't understand." Haruto picked up a stone and placed it in the river. The water curved around it without resistance, continuing its path. "There is no struggle in the river," Haruto said. "It does not push or pull. It moves not because it wants to, but because it is its nature to move. What you are seeking is not something to grasp, but something to release." Koji sat in silence for a long while. Haruto continued, "When I was young, I too searched. I thought enlightenment was a place, a summit to reach. The more I climbed, the more I lost my breath. One day, exhausted and bitter, I came to this river. I threw away my books, my goals, and sat here, not out of wisdom, but defeat. And in that stillness, the world changed not because it changed, but because I did." Koji said softly, "You became the river." "No," Haruto replied. Smiling faintly, I stopped trying not to be. The wind stirred the reeds. Birds sang in the trees. The river, unbothered by the words exchanged, flowed as always endlessly. Without effort, Koji returned the next day, but he asked no questions. He simply sat beside Haruto, watching the river. He noticed how the sunlight danced on its surface, how the shadows of clouds painted stories on the water. He felt, not with intellect, but with his chest, a quieting of the mind that no scroll had ever taught him. Days turned into weeks. One morning, Haruto did not rise. He remained in his small cabin, his body growing weaker, his breath thin. Word spread through the village, and Koji came at once. Haruto lay on his mat, smiling faintly as if the river had already carried a part of him away. "Are you afraid?" Koji asked. Haruto shook his head. "The river does not fear where it flows." Koji knelt beside him. "Then tell me, what do I do when you're gone?" Haruto reached out and touched Koji's chest. "You listen, not with these," he said, gesturing to Koji's ears, "but with this." Koji held Haruto's hand until it stilled. The man who sat by the river had become the river after Haruto's passing. Koji built no shrine, raised no monument. Instead, he returned to the stone where Haruto had sat, and each morning he too sat in silence, letting the river carry away what words could never hold. People continued to pass. Children still pointed. Farmers nodded. Travelers paused. Some even joined him, if only for a moment. But Koji never spoke of teachings or gave lectures. He sat, not to teach, but to be like the river, endlessly moving, yet always still. Reflection, the story of Haruto and Koji, is not one of teachings passed down in ink or stone, but of a living wisdom, the kind that flows not from the mouth, but from being. Zen does not demand explanation. It invites presence. To sit beside the river is to sit with yourself. And perhaps that is where the journey begins. Story 15. The roof beneath the pines. The evening mist rolled down from the slopes of Mount Torin, where the pines stood like silent monks in meditation. In the valley below, nestled between terraced rice fields and winding dirt paths, was a tiny village. At its edge stood a thatched house with a worn wooden porch, where an old man sat folding paper cranes. His name was Master Rengetsu, though none of the villagers called him that anymore. They simply knew him as the old man by the pine, the one who came down from the northern monastery many years ago and never left. It was said he had once been a revered Zen teacher, but something had shifted, and he walked away from the temple walls and rituals, seeking silence deeper than chanting could offer. He lived quietly, planting herbs in the morning, walking along the stream in the afternoon, and folding cranes at dusk. Each crane bore a whisper of a lesson he had once taught, yet he never spoke, unless someone asked. That day, a man named Kai arrived in the village. He was lean, dressed in a crisp white shirt, and carried a leather notebook under his arm. Kai was an architect from the city, exhausted and lost in the machinery of deadlines, contracts, and a success that no longer meant anything. He had once dreamed of building spaces where people could breathe and remember who they were. But somewhere along the line, his work had become soulless. Mechanical skyscrapers of steel that scraped the sky but never touched the heart, burned out, sleepless, and disillusioned. Kai had wandered without aim until a friend whispered to him about a village beneath the pines, where a silent master might still be found. He reached the old man's porch at twilight. "May I sit, Kai?" asked. The old man nodded, not looking up from the paper in his hands. For a long time they sat in silence, broken only by the rustling of pine needles and the occasional chirp of a night bird. Finally, the old man said, "You've come a long way." Kai inhaled. "Yes, ... but I'm not sure what I've come for." Then, "You're lucky," the master replied. "The ones who know what they want usually leave with nothing." Kai smiled faintly, unsure whether it was a riddle or a truth. "I used to want to create beauty," he said. "Now I don't even know what that means." "Describe it to me," the master said. Beginning to fold another crane, Kai hesitated. "Beauty used to be something I could shape. A curve of a roof that made someone stop and breathe. A window that let in the morning in just the right way. But now, all I build are things that make money." The master offered him the folded crane. "Even the most beautiful building will fall. Stones erode, wood rots, glass shatters. Then what's the point of making anything at all?" Kai asked. The master placed the crane on the porch railing and watched the wind lift it gently. "The point is not to make something permanent. It is to be present while making it." Kai looked down at his hands, calloused and tired. "I used to love the sound of pencil on paper, the quiet of a sketch coming to life, and now it's just emails and approvals. Clients who want cheaper materials, bosses who want taller towers. Nothing feels mine anymore." The master stood up slowly and walked toward a nearby pine tree. He pointed to a hollow trunk where moss had grown over time. This tree grew bent because a storm struck it when it was young. It leaned toward the sun after that. It's not the tallest, nor the straightest, but it's alive, and the birds build nests in it. He turned back to Kai. "Will you keep building straight towers that no bird wishes to land on?" That night, Kai stayed in the village. He slept under a thin quilt, listening to the wind through the pine needles, and for the first time in months, he dreamt without Grey Dot. In the morning, he woke early. The old man was already in the garden, harvesting mint leaves. Kai joined him, watching how his movements were slow but sure, not efficient, not hurried, but deeply present. "Can I ask you something?" Kai said. The old man nodded. "You ever stop teaching?" The old man smiled. "I stopped speaking in front of crowds, but I never stopped living what I taught." They walked together to the stream that curved behind the house. The water sparkled like silver threads under the rising sun. Kai bent down and touched the surface. It was cold, clear, honest. "What do I do now?" he asked, almost like a child. "Find the space within you that still draws," the old man said. "Not to impress, not to prove, just to feel alive again. Don't think I can go back to the city. You may not have to. But my work, my name, my obligations." The master dipped a hand into the water. "The river does not mourn the mountains it left behind. It flows, always, toward what is next." Kai looked at the old man, then at the stream, and then up at the mountains, silent, watchful, eternal. He stayed in the village for 3 weeks. During that time, he sketched again, not buildings, but trees, birds, children playing in the fields. He helped repair the roof of the schoolhouse. He drank tea with elders and sat beside the master every evening under the pines. When he finally left, he didn't return to his firm. Instead, he traveled across the country, designing small shelters for mountain schools, hospice homes, and places of retreat. His lines became softer, his designs more open to air and light. Each building whispered peace, and those who entered often said they felt as if the space itself were breathing. Years later, someone wrote an article about Kai, calling him the architect of stillness. He never responded to interviews, but in a letter to a friend, he once wrote, I met a man who folded paper cranes and reminded me that beauty is not something we possess, but something we participate in. Since then, I have tried not to build, for the world's eyes before its soul. And in the village beneath Mount Torin, the old man still sat every dusk beneath the pines, folding cranes. He never spoke of the people who came and went. He only watched the wind and smiled when one of his cranes took flight. Story 16. The Wind That Forgot to Rest in the Quiet Hills of Okayama. There lived a young man named Ray, who had never learned how to stop. From the moment he woke up until the sun dropped behind the pines, Ray chased after things. Status, skills, validation, knowledge, and more. His heart was like a wind that never paused, only speeding up with each new desire. He ran a small pottery business that had grown famous for its perfectly symmetrical teacups. He had memorized hundreds of glazes, learned to control the fire with obsessive precision, and timed each step to perfection. And yet, every time he finished a batch, he felt nothing but a hollow ache in his chest, as if some vital essence had evaporated in the heat. Rest is for those without ambition, he often told himself. One winter morning, Ray visited his friend Haruki, an old monk who lived in a wooden temple carved into the cliffs. Haruki greeted him with a pot of tea and a smile that seemed to have no urgency behind it. You look pale, Ray, Haruki said, pouring tea into a handmade cup. It was uneven, slightly wobbly, and completely at peace with itself. Even your shadow seems tired. Ray scoffed. Who has time for peace when there is so much to achieve? Haruki chuckled gently. Do you know the story of the wind that forgot to rest? Ray shook his head, eyes narrowing. Haruki began. The wind that forgot to rest long ago. The wind was born in a whisper between mountains. She played joyfully with leaves and danced over rivers. In her early days, the wind was soft, curious, light. But the more she roamed the earth, the more she heard people calling for her. Blow stronger, wind. The ships would shout, bring rain to our crops. The farmers would plead, drive away the smoke. The cities would cry. So the wind, wanting to be helpful, grew stronger, faster, and more powerful. She began to chase storms, hurl waves, and strip trees bare. She forgot how to pause. Even when the skies were clear, she rushed over hills, looking for something else to stir, something else to fix. But one day, the wind came across a still lake in the center of a forgotten forest. She tried to ripple it, to make it dance, but the lake remained still. The wind screamed, spun, howled, but nothing moved. She felt humiliated. Then a voice came from beneath the lake's surface. Dear wind, you are mighty, but not everything is yours to stir. Sometimes, stillness is the true strength. The wind froze. She had never heard silence answer her before. The lake continued, even you must rest, or you will forget your essence. The wind hesitated. She hovered above the water, uncertain, but then, for the first time since her creation, she grew quiet. She lay down over the lake like a feather on glass, and something miraculous happened. The wind saw her reflection. She had become unrecognizable, torn, wild, and desperate. In that stillness, she began to weep. She had been chasing the world. For so long, she had never looked within. Haruki looked at Ray, eyes steady. You, too, are like the wind, he said. Always moving, always chasing. But when will you see your reflection? Ray put down his cup. The tea was warm but flavorless on his tongue. His thoughts, usually so sharp, began to blur. I'm not sure I know how to stop. Stopping is not the opposite of progress. Haruki said, it is where the roots of understanding grow. That night, Ray did something unusual. He returned to his studio and turned off the lamp. He sat alone in the dark with a single unfired cup beside him. The wheel was silent. The kill cold, he listened to his breath, something he hadn't done since childhood. It was shallow, fast, almost panicked. He realized that even when alone, his body kept moving as if fleeing some invisible wolf. And so he sat 1 hour, 2. Cup beside him seemed to shift, not physically, but in meaning. It was no longer a thing to perfect or sell. It was simply there, a trace of earth shaped by human hands, fragile and complete in its imperfection. Tears welled in Ray's eyes. He didn't understand why, but he let them fall. The next morning, he walked into his studio with empty hands. He touched the clay, but didn't command it. He let it slump, lean, wobble, and as he worked, a soft smile appeared on his face, one that hadn't visited in years. A week later, Ray returned to the temple with a gift. It was a misshapen bowl glazed in soft indigo, like a dusk sky after rain. Haruki took it in his hands. Ah, this bowl knows how to breathe. Ray bowed. So do I, a little more, each day. Philosophical reflection in our pursuit of mastery. Success or purpose, we often forget that rest is not laziness, it is wisdom. The wind that never pauses becomes a storm. The mind that never rests forgets its clarity. We live in a world that celebrates speed, but the soul does not rush. Zen teaches not that we abandon motion, but that we honor stillness equally. Like the breath that must exhale after inhaling, action without pause leads to imbalance to see. Clearly, one must learn to be still. To hear one's own heart, the noise must fade. To remember one's essence, the chase must end at least for a while. Psychological insight Ray's exhaustion is a mirror of modern psychological burnout. Many high-performing individuals suffer from an inability to rest due to internalized worth metrics, achievement, perfection, recognition. These drivers, while productive, can become compulsions that obscure emotional needs. The wind is a metaphor for sympathetic nervous system, dominance, fight or flight mode, which, if never counterbalanced, leads to chronic stress, anxiety, and identity loss. Ray's turning point came not through more doing, but through sitting with discomfort, letting the body and emotions catch up to the soul. Rest is not something we earn. It is something we require to remain human. Meditative, closing take a breath. Where are you rushing toward? Where is the still lake in your own forest? Pause. Let the wind settle. Let the ripples fade. Look into your reflection, not for judgment, but for remembrance. You are not the storm you chase. You are the stillness that watches it pass. Let today be the day the wind rests. Let today be the day you begin to return. Story 17. The monk who buried his shadow in the deep mountains of southern China, in a monastery surrounded by mist and time-worn pine trees, lived a monk named Shen. He was not known for his eloquence, nor for any outstanding spiritual feats. In fact, most of the younger monks referred to him as the quiet pot washer, for that was what he did each morning and evening, cleaning the iron pots used to feed everyone. His movements slow, his eyes lowered, his hands scarred from years of heat and water and silence. Shen had arrived at the monastery more than 30 years ago, walking in from a rainstorm, soaked and half-starved. He never spoke of the life he had lived before the mountain. The abbot who accepted him never asked. He simply handed Shen a cloth to dry himself and pointed to the kitchen. From that day on, Shen worked. He rose before dawn, sat through meditation, and then spent the rest of his time in the kitchen or the garden. He seemed content. He had no disciples, gave no Dharma talks, and seldom exchanged words beyond necessary greetings. When asked questions, he often answered with a gesture or a story that seemed unrelated unless one listened very carefully. But there was one thing strange about Shen. He cast no shadow, not in sunlight, nor in lantern glow, nor even during the full moon when all shadows danced silver across the courtyard. His form remained whole, but his shadow never followed him. The other monks noticed it, but grew used to it. Some said it was a sign of enlightenment. Others said it was a curse. Only the abbot, old and nearly blind by then, once whispered, he did not lose his shadow. He buried it. One day, a young monk named Ji came to Shen during the afternoon break, his face furrowed with worry. Ji had been struggling with thoughts, doubts, cravings, memories of his family, the scent of pork buns in the village below, the feel of silk against his fingers when he used to sneak into his father's shop and run them through his hands. Master Shen, Ji said, hesitating, I can't stop thinking about the world I left behind. Sometimes, during meditation, I am not breathing, I'm hungering. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the faces of the women I've loved. I thought these thoughts would fade, but they're louder now. Shen, who was scrubbing the black crust from a soup pot, looked up and smiled softly. When did you last feed your shadow? He asked. My shadow, Ji asked, confused. Shen nodded. Follow me. They walked together in silence, past the bell tower, down the stone steps that led beyond the monastery's inner grounds to a trail most monks never used. As the trees thickened and the light dimmed, Ji felt a strange stillness, as though sound itself held its breath. Finally, they came to a clearing. At the center was a single stone. Beneath it, Shen said, was the grave. I buried my shadow here, Shen said. 31 years ago. Ji was silent, unsure whether to ask if Shen was speaking metaphorically or literally. Shen continued. I was not always a monk. Once, I lived in a city, wore embroidered robes, and spoke sweet words for profit. I lied, I seduced, I drank until dawn and harmed many people. But the worst of all, he paused, and his voice lowered, was what I did to the one person who loved me when I was nothing. He looked at the stone. I left her, lied to her. When she begged me to stay, I laughed. Later, I heard she had thrown herself into the river. Ji's mouth dried. When I arrived here, I could not sit in meditation without hearing her voice, or the sound of water, or the laughter of my former self. I wept during morning chants. I trembled during silence, until one night I came here, and I dug a grave. Shen bent slightly, touching the stone with reverence, and I said to myself, Shadow, I do not deny you, but I cannot carry you any more. Then I wrote every memory, every lie, every face I'd hurt onto a scroll and buried it here. Since then, I've had no shadow, but it doesn't mean it is gone. Ji looked at the stone, uncertain. Isn't that just avoidance? Shen turned, his face serene. No, avoidance is when we run from our shadow. Burying is an act of acceptance. I fed my shadow with all the honesty I could muster, then gave it a place to rest. Some people hang their regrets on their backs until they stoop with age. Others pretend they have no regrets. But a few, we choose to acknowledge our past and lay it down. G swallowed, feeling something stir within. Shen added, "You cannot meditate your way out of being human. Past does not vanish through silence, but when you stop wrestling with it, you become light enough to walk without chains." G returned to the monastery that evening in deep thought. That night, he dreamt of his childhood village. He saw his mother folding dumplings, his brother climbing trees, and himself running barefoot, laughing, before the world demanded so much of him. The next morning, G skipped the bell ringing. Instead, he carried a small wooden box into the forest. Inside were scribbled notes, names of those he'd wronged, memories of shame and longing, and one tiny red ribbon a girl had once tied around his wrist. Hours later, Shen found him in the clearing, kneeling beside a newly dug hole. G looked up, eyes wet but peaceful. "Did it help?" Shen asked. G nodded. "I didn't know my shadow was so heavy until I tried to set it down." They stood in silence, two men who had both made peace with their darkness, not by denying it, but by giving it a resting place. That evening, as the sun fell and monks moved like shadows through the courtyard, Shen walked past the well. The moon had risen. He paused and looked down. For the first time in 31 years, a faint shadow stretched out beside him, long and slender, following his steps like an old friend returning home. Story 18. The Eyes of the Forgotten. There is a narrow alley in the old quarter of Hanoi that bends sharply behind a crumbling Buddhist temple. Few people notice the small, faded sign nailed to a crooked wooden post, "Duck Hand Tea and Heirlooms." Most walk past, thinking it just another dusty antique shop. But those who do enter often leave with something more than a porcelain kettle or an old inkstone. They leave with stories, buried too long in silence. Min was not a man who believed in ghosts or fate. He was a documentary filmmaker, trained in Paris, precise in logic, and loyal only to facts. When his editor sent him to Vietnam to film a piece on haunted traditions and folk beliefs, Min scoffed but accepted. It was an excuse to visit the homeland of his parents, which he had not seen since he was a child. He intended to make a clean, debunking film, nothing but atmospheric lighting and local superstitions. He never expected to find Lan. The shop was almost hidden by a curtain of old red lanterns swaying in the wind. Min entered with the camera slung over his shoulder, not expecting much. The scent of sandalwood and dried herbs hung thick in the air. A young woman stood behind a bamboo counter, arranging ceramic figures. She was slight, pale, her eyes quiet. Like still water, she didn't look up as Min approached. "Are you the owner?" he asked in Vietnamese, careful with the tone. She nodded. "I'm doing a documentary on folk legends in the northern provinces. Would you mind if I filmed your shop?" "No cameras," she replied simply. Min was taken aback. "Even just the shop?" "Not you, no." There was something final in her tone, not rude, but untouched by negotiation. Min looked around. On one shelf sat a black lacquered box, finely carved, almost glowing despite the shadows. Drawn by some instinct he couldn't explain, he stepped toward it. "Don't touch that," the woman said sharply. He froze. "That's not for sale." Min nodded slowly and stepped back. "Is it a family heirloom?" She hesitated, then answered, "It's a memory. Some things should not be awakened." The way she said it made something shift in Min's chest. That night, he dreamed of a woman walking through fog, her back always to him. When he tried to call out, he had no voice. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound of a bell tolling faintly in his ears. The next day he returned. "You again," she said. "I'd like to talk. No camera, just a story." She paused, looked at him for a long moment, then gestured toward a stool by the counter. Min sat. "My grandmother, thou, owned this shop before me," Lan began. "She was born in 1921 and lived through 5 regimes, 3 wars, and 2 betrayals. But the worst was the one that never made it into any book." She reached under the counter and placed a faded photograph on the wood surface. In it, a girl stood smiling beside a soldier in French colonial uniform. Behind them was this very shop. My grandmother was 16. The soldier's name was Henry. He bought tea here often. Over time, he began to leave notes, pressed flowers, poems. Everyone in the neighborhood gossiped. She was a beautiful girl. He was a lonely man far from home. Min leaned in, notepad in hand. But one day, he disappeared. No word, no letter, nothing. Months passed. Then the French police came looking for a traitorous soldier who had stolen military secrets and vanished. Lan's voice dropped. "Found his body buried under the floorboards of this shop." Min blinked. "What?" "My great-grandfather was arrested. They said he murdered Henry to protect the family's honor. He never confessed. Died in prison. My grandmother, shamed, broken, stayed here all her life. She refused to leave. She never married." Lan opened the lacquered box. Inside was a dried lotus, brown with age, and a strip of yellowed paper. Min bent forward to read the faded French words. "Je reviendrai pour toi. I will return for you." Lan looked up. She said his spirit never left. That sometimes at night, the smell of French cologne filled the room. That teacups moved by themselves. That someone cried in the back room. Min stared at the box, unsure whether to believe. "And what do you believe?" he asked. "I believe silence can rot, that memories kept too long become shadows." That night, Min set up a sound recorder just outside the shop, without telling Lan. He wanted proof not of ghosts, but of people. Maybe some teenagers sneaking around at night, maybe a rat. He listened to hours of audio, nothing but wind and distant horns. But then, at exactly 2:12 a.m., he heard it, a man's voice, whispering in French. "Thou, mon coeur," the tape hissed. Then nothing. He played it again and again. The voice was real. Not an echo, not interference. Min shivered. He returned to the shop in the morning, but Lan was not there. An old neighbor passing by told him the shop was closed indefinitely, that Lan had left a note saying she needed to go find peace. Min stood before the shuttered door, the sign still creaking in the wind. He never aired the documentary. Instead, he wrote a private letter to his editor explaining that the subject matter was too sensitive, that sometimes stories are not meant to be told, but to be held, like a secret bruise under the skin. Years passed. Min returned to France, made other films, won awards. But sometimes, just before sleep, he would dream of a girl with still eyes and a soldier with empty hands, both waiting inside a shop that no longer exists on any map. And in those dreams, the box was always open, waiting. Story 19. The man who watched the moon fell on the eastern slope of Mount Kareha. There was a small cabin that faced the sky with devotion. It belonged to an old man named Hiroshi. Every night for the past 43 years, Hiroshi had stood at the edge of his porch with a telescope, staring at the moon as if it owed him an answer. He was once a scientist, a lunar geologist to be exact, with work known across observatories in Kyoto and Nagano. But decades ago, he walked away from the profession, without public explanation, without fanfare. He chose silence. He chose retreat. The villagers whispered theories. Some said he'd gone mad, that he believed he saw a crack forming on the moon's surface. Others claimed he once loved a woman who left him for a cosmonaut, and every night he stared upward in mourning. But no one dared ask. The villagers respected madness if it was polite and didn't disrupt the peace. But Hiroshi was not. Mad, he watched the moon because he had seen something no one else believed. And what he saw had changed him. It was the winter of 1981. He had been part of a classified research group tracking an unusual frequency echoing from the Sea of Tranquility. Instruments had picked up tremors, not of impact, but of breath. Rhythmic, slow, almost ... intentional. The data was archived, dismissed, buried under bureaucracy. But Hiroshi had heard it with his own ears. The moon was not dead. It was not even silent. It was ... listening. When he told his team, they laughed. When he pressed further, he was dismissed. When he persisted, he was blacklisted. So he left the world of men and climbed up Mount Kureha, where he could listen in peace. For years, Hiroshi kept records. He charted fluctuations in the moon's brightness, changes in its orbit too small to matter astrophysicists, but too precise to be coincidence. He came to believe the moon responded to human thought, or at least to human sorrow. During the tsunami of 2011, Hiroshi had cried on his porch for hours as the moon dimmed, just faintly, as if veiled by some cosmic grief. When his cat, Mise, died at age 18. The shadows on the moon's surface shifted that night in a way he had never seen before, not astronomically, but emotionally, as if the moon had tilted its face in condolence. He wrote everything in notebooks, one per year. They filled shelves now, neatly organized, with titles like Year of the Hushed Moon and Season of the Bleeding Light. He never published, he simply documented. The act of watching was enough, but Hiroshi was growing old. His hands had begun to tremble. The telescope often blurred no matter how carefully he adjusted it. Some nights, the moon came to him in dreams, instead wide, maternal, with a mouth that did not move, but always said one thing. Remember, one afternoon, a knock came. On his cabin door, a woman in her late 20s stood there, her eyes tired but kind. Your doctor, Hiroshi Takeda, right? The lunar geologist, she asked. He nodded slowly. My name is Noriko. I'm a physicist from Sapporo. I read your unpublished thesis from 1978. Someone uploaded it anonymously years ago. I think you were right. Hiroshi stared at her as if she had spoken the name of a dead relative. Noriko continued. There's a satellite orbiting the moon, now Artemis 7. It picked up something in March, a series of pulses. 5, to be exact. 1 every 13 seconds. Not electromagnetic, not geological, but ... organic. His heart nearly stopped. They pulled me off the project when I pressed too hard. But I saved the data. I want to know what it means. I think you do too. That night, they sat on the porch, huddled under thick blankets, sharing warm tea. She brought out a laptop and showed him the waveform. He closed his eyes. The rhythm was identical to the sound he'd heard in 1981, but it had changed. It was ... louder. "Moon's pulse," he whispered. "It's accelerating." Noriko looked up at the sky. What happens when it beats too fast? Hiroshi had no answer. The next week, Noriko stayed with him, poring over his notebooks. She scanned, uploaded, archived everything. Hiroshi didn't mind. He knew he wouldn't be able to write for much longer. One night, the sky changed. The moon, rose red, not the blood moon hue of eclipses, but deeper, richer, like rust bleeding into silk. Hiroshi dropped his teacup. It shattered on the wood. "It's begun," he said. Noriko checked her instruments. Radiation levels were unchanged, gravity consistent, but something felt different. The crickets had gone silent, the wind had paused, the trees somehow leaned. Toward the mountain, at midnight, they heard a sound, not with ears, but deep inside their bodies, a trembling that made Noriko cry out and Hiroshi fall to his knees. It wasn't pain. It was recognition. The moon wasn't merely responding to sorrow. It was mourning who died. Noriko gasped. "No," Hiroshi said, tears pouring down his face. "Not who, what." The next day, global news reported strange. Lunar readings, minor tidal disturbances, no panic, only confusion. But Hiroshi knew the moon's heart was failing. Not physically, spiritually. For centuries, humans had howled at it, cursed under it, wept beneath its glow. The moon had absorbed everything, lullabies, prayers, poems, betrayals. It had held our loneliness, like a parent holds a sleeping child. But now the weight was too much. "I think we broke it," Noriko said quietly. Hiroshi said nothing. The next week, they both stopped sleeping. The moon glowed through their eyelids, even when shut. Every night it pulsed, a rhythm stronger than thought, echoing inside the ribs. It was calling. Calling what? Noriko whispered. "Not what. Who?" Hiroshi corrected. "It's calling. Us." That night, they climbed the summit at 2:43 a.m. The moon blinked. There's no scientific explanation for it. There was no eclipse, no shadow, no interference. It simply blinked like a giant eye, weary and overwhelmed. Then a light poured down. Not a beam, not even visible, but it pulled at the skin, as if gravity had reversed. Noriko nearly fell forward. Hiroshi reached out, catching her, anchoring her to the earth. But he knew. "I have to go," he said. "What?" "She's been speaking to me for years. I think she needs someone to stay with her." "You mean ... die?" "I mean remember." Noriko wept, shaking her head. "I can't lose you now. You're the only one who understands." "You understand now, too," he said softly. He pressed a small notebook into her hands. The final one, half filled. "She's not just a satellite. She's the archive of human ache. Someone needs to carry the rest of the story. Someone younger. Someone who still believes." Then Hiroshi stepped forward. Not floating, not disappearing. Just ... becoming quiet. The wind picked up. The stars shimmered like eyes in mourning. And the moon pulsed 1, 2, 3, and then silence. Noriko stayed on the mountain. She built a second cabin next to Hiroshi's. Every night she watches the moon, listening, writing, and sometimes, just sometimes, she hears a heartbeat. Still faint, still present, she calls it the last witness. Story 20. The cloud that refused to rain there was a time. In a quiet village, surrounded by emerald hills and sleeping rivers, when the fields cracked from thirst and the air buzzed with silence. No birds sang, no frogs croaked. The villagers looked to the sky every day, but the clouds, like distant ships, passed without a drop. Among them floated one small cloud, soft and silvery, who watched everything below but never wept. The cloud was young, still learning the ways of wind and water, still unsure of its purpose. It had traveled far over cities, drowned in noise, over mountains crowned in snow, over oceans that shimmered like mirrors. But never had it rained. Not once it believed that raining meant disappearing, dissolving, becoming something else. And it was afraid. What if, by raining, it would lose itself? What if its shape would vanish and it would never return? So it chose instead to float and observe, to be safe. Below, an old monk named Anshu tended the monastery garden, watering plants with bowls of leftover tea, saving each drop like it were gold. The monks grew thin. The crops wilted. Still, Anshu did not complain. One evening, as twilight dipped its fingers into the horizon, Anshu stood at the temple steps and looked up at the small cloud. He bowed, hands together, and whispered to the sky, "Do not fear becoming. Even the river must leave the mountain to find its name." The cloud trembled. That night, the wind nudged it gently toward the mountains, where lightning flickered in the distance like the eyes of sleeping gods. The cloud looked below trees, bowed like monks. Animals curled into silence. Even the earth held its breath. And then it heard the cries of a child from the village, a voice not of anger or demand, but longing. "Please," the voice said, "just a little rain, so the flowers can bloom for my mother's grave." The cloud could not ignore it. It drifted lower, heart pounding. It remembered what the elder clouds once said in the sky assemblies. "We do not vanish when we rain. We transform, we nourish. And in doing so, we become part of everything." The cloud hovered over the graveyard, saw the child kneeling with a single wilted lotus, lips cracked from dryness. The air was still. Time waited, and then softly it let go. At first it was just a mist, a gentle sigh. Then a drizzle, then rain. Cool drops danced on rooftops, kissed the soil, fed the roots. The child laughed. Old Anshu raised his face to the heavens, eyes closed, tears mingling with the falling sky. The cloud felt itself thinning, unraveling like silk in the breeze. But it was not afraid now. For the first time, it understood. In letting go, it had finally arrived. Zen parable inserted. A disciple asked the master, "What happens when the self disappears?" The master pointed to a stream and said, "Stream becomes the river becomes the ocean, and the ocean becomes the sky. Nothing is lost. It only flows." Philosophical commentary. The story of the reluctant cloud reflects the essential truth about the nature of fear, particularly the fear of change and dissolution. We often resist transformation because we equate change with annihilation. But Zen wisdom reminds us that to dissolve is not to die, it is to join. Like the cloud that rains, our existence becomes richer when we cease clinging to our form. An identity that refuses to flow becomes a prison. Yet, when we accept impermanence, we become part of the larger cycle of life. In releasing what we are, we make space to become what we are meant to be. Rain is the cloud's fulfillment, not its end. Psychological reflection. Many people today feel like that cloud. They hold on tightly to labels, roles, appearances, fearing that letting go will mean losing themselves. But in therapeutic settings, we often find that transformation occurs when people allow themselves to be vulnerable to rain. When they release grief, anger, or false identities, they feel light again, free. This story gently teaches the art of surrender not as failure, but as the doorway to belonging. Rain, tears, silence, and presence are all parts of emotional integration. Healing like rain begins the moment we allow ourselves to fall. Meditative ending. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and imagine yourself as a cloud, light and drifting. Ask yourself, what are you holding that you are afraid to release? A thought, a memory, a fear. Now, gently breathe out. Let it rain. You are not vanishing. You are returning to everything. Let this be your mantra. Today, to let go is not to disappear, but to become. Story 21. The silence between two stones in a valley framed by solemn cliffs and stitched together with winding rivers. There lived a woman named Lian. She was known throughout the region as the keeper of stones, not because she collected them, but because she listened to them. People from faraway villages climbed the narrow paths to reach her home. A modest hut perched on a quiet ridge, where stones sat arranged in deliberate formation circles, spirals, lines that stretched toward the sun. Some called her a mystic, others a lunatic, but all came with their stories, hoping she could read something in the silence of rocks that they themselves could not understand. Lian had once been different. Many years ago, she was a renowned teacher of poetry in the capital. Her voice carried the cadence of old scrolls and river songs. Her lectures echoed through the corridors of universities. She wore silks the color of moonlight and spoke with the quiet authority of one who had studied deeply and loved fiercely. Then the war came. It came not like a thunderclap, but like creeping moss-low, insidious, wrapping around life's certainties. Her husband Jun was conscripted. Her students were scattered. One by one, letters stopped arriving. Silence replaced the syllables she once adored. And when she finally received news of Chen's death, a vague message, no body, no grave, something within her unraveled. She left the city. She took only a straw mat, a satchel of books, and two stones, one smooth as water, the other jagged as grief. They were the last gifts Jun had given her, carried from a pilgrimage to a temple that neither of them had lived long enough to visit together. For years, she lived among the rocks. She watched how the wind shaped them, how water polished their edges, how they endured. In her silence, she began to hear them speak not in words, but in presence. Villagers came with questions. Will my son return from the army? Should I forgive the one who betrayed me? Why does my heart feel like winter even when the sun is warm? Lian never gave direct answers. She would lead the questioner to a stone, ask them to sit, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. She believed wisdom bloomed not from speech, but from stillness. Between two stones, she would say, there is a silence that answers more than 1,000 voices. One summer afternoon, a young man named Kale arrived. His eyes were restless, his back hunched like a sack too heavy for his frame. He carried a sealed box and said nothing for a long time. Lian offered him tea. He did not drink. I came because I heard you know how to bury pain, he said finally. She didn't respond. He set the box down with a sharp thud. My brother died 3 winters ago. I still have his ashes. I carry them with me. I can't let go. Lian studied him, then stood and beckoned. They walked to a grove where 2 large stones rested side by side, one white, one black. She gestured for him to sit in the space between them. He hesitated. Do you expect the stones to talk? She smiled faintly. No, I expect you to finally listen. Hours passed. The wind rustled the grass. A hawk cried overhead. Clouds drifted, like slow thoughts. Cale sat, tense at first. Then slowly, his body softened. He placed the box on the ground. He watched ants crawl across its lid. He began to breathe deeper. And then he spoke not to Leanne, but to the box. I hated you for leaving, he whispered. I hated how everyone mourned you and forgot about me. I hated how I couldn't hate you for long, because I missed you. Too much, he wept. For the first time since the funeral, when the sun dipped low, Leanne returned and sat beside him. You did not come to bury pain, she said. You came to finally let it speak. Cale turned toward her. What do I do with the ashes? She picked up a small stone-like grey, with a spiral fossil embedded within, and handed it to him. Keep this with you, she said. Leave the box with the earth. Let it go. You are not abandoning your brother. You are freeing the part of him that has imprisoned you. The next morning, Cale dug a small hole beside the black stone. He buried the box there, gently, reverently. For a moment, the earth seemed to sigh. When he stood, his shoulders were lighter. He did not smile, but his eyes no longer darted. He placed the grey stone in his pocket and bowed. Leanne watched him descend the hill. Disappearing into the valley, his pace no longer heavy, she turned to the two stones and whispered, Thank you for your silence. That night, she placed the smooth and jagged stone's gifts into a small satchel. She climbed to the ridge's highest point and sat facing the moon. It had taken years, but she too had learned that to grieve is not to break, but open. And so she opened herself to the sky, and she listened, and the stones, always listening, held her in return. Zen parable inserted. A student asked the master, Why do the wise sit in silence? The master replied, Because silence holds the answers the tongue is too loud to hear. Philosophical commentary. This story speaks to the sacred space between pain and healing. The silent pause where grief is neither rejected nor indulged, but witnessed. Stones, unmoving and ancient, represent a kind of presence that does not demand or judge. Their stillness offers a mirror. Grief often festers when denied expression, yet speaking alone is not enough. True healing begins when we allow ourselves to sit with pain without rushing to escape it. The silence between two stones is the space where transformation brews. It is not absence, it is spaciousness. Psychological reflection, modern psychology, affirms that unprocessed grief becomes embedded in our bodies and minds. The reluctance to let go of ashes, of stories, of guilt is a common wound. But what the narrative gently offers is an alternative. We do not move on from grief. We move with it, giving it a home that is not a prison. The symbolic act of burying the box after speaking to it represents a therapeutic ritual, one that allows the mourner to integrate loss into life, not as an erasure, but as a return to balance. Meditative ending. Sit for a moment. Close your eyes and place your hands on your lap as if holding a stone. Ask yourself, what am I carrying that I've never allowed to speak? Now, in silence, listen, and if a tear comes, let it. It is the voice of the stone within you, finally finding its language. Let this be your mantra today. I honor my grief not by forgetting, but by listening. Story 22. The empty teacup in a mist-covered village, nestled between two winding rivers, lived an old potter named Tenzin. His hands, hardened and cracked from years of shaping earth and flame, held stories in every curve of the porcelain. He crafted. His workshop was small, cluttered with clay dust and sunlight, and people said his teacups could hold more than tea. They held silence, memory, even sorrow. Every morning, Tenzin would sit quietly under the mulberry tree outside his shop, sipping green tea from a small, cracked cup. He never sold this cup, though many offered a fortune for it. "This one is not for sale," he would say with a soft smile. "It is still listening." One day, a young woman named Aiko came to his workshop. She had traveled from the city, her suitcase heavy, not with clothes but with exhaustion. Her eyes were distant, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say your teacups are different," she said. Tenzin looked at her without answering. Instead, he pointed to a stool beside his and poured her a cup of tea. The tea was light, fragrant, the color of sunlight on stone. She held the cup with both hands but did not drink. "I lost someone," she said after a while. "I don't know how to carry it." Tenzin nodded slowly. "We don't carry loss, Aiko. It carries us, until we learn how to stand still inside it." She stayed in the village for several days. Each morning, she returned to sit with Tenzin beneath the mulberry tree. They rarely spoke. Sometimes he told her short stories, not of gods or warriors, but of leaves falling, of storms passing, of cracked teacups that still held warmth. And each time he served her tea in a different cup, some smooth, some rough, all handmade. One afternoon, as the rain fell gently on the tiled roofs, Iko watched Tenzin pull a lump of clay from a weathered basket. "Would you like to make one?" he asked. "I wouldn't know how," she replied. "Good," he said. "Then the cup will teach you." He guided her hands, steadying them when they trembled, letting them move when they found rhythm. The clay spun beneath her fingers, soft. At first, then resisting, like grief. Her first cup was uneven, thick-lipped, lopsided. "It's ugly," she said. Tnzin. Looked at it as if seeing an old friend. "It's honest." That night, Aiko sat by the river with her imperfect teacup and felt something soften in her chest. The silence no longer echoed. It hummed. The next morning, she returned to find Tenzin staring into his kill. The fire roared within, orange and alive. "There is something I never told you," he said. She waited. "My wife died many years ago," he said. "She loved tea. Every morning we sat here, just like this. When she passed, I tried to keep drinking. Alone, but the tea turned bitter. Then one day, I drank from this cracked cup." He held it up, and the silence tasted sweet again. Aiko took her cup and poured them both tea. They drank slowly, without words, and for the first time, the grief in her bones did not ache, it breathed. As days passed, Aiko began shaping more cups. Some broke, some melted, but a few held. She lined them on the shelf and gave each a name, not of people she had lost, but of feelings she had forgotten. Calm, trust, hunger, home. One day, a traveler from another village stopped by. He saw her sitting alone, shaping a new cup. "Is the potter here?" he asked. Aiko smiled gently. "He's not far, but today I'm listening for the clay." The traveler pointed to the cup in her hands. "What will you call that one?" She paused, letting the wheels spin, the clay whisper. Then she said, "Forgiveness." Weeks turned into months. The mulberry tree bloomed. children from the village came to learn how to make small bowls. Aiko, now steady in hand, taught them with the same softness Tenzin had shown her. And yet, every day, she still used her first misshapen cup. It reminded her that not everything that's uneven is broken. Some wounds become windows, some cracks. Let light in. Then, one morning, she found a letter on the stool beneath the tree. It was written in Tenzin's careful, slanted handwriting. Dear Aiko, when I first saw you, I recognized the silence you carried. It was not unfamiliar. Many come, here seeking something to hold. But you learned to listen instead. That is the first step of healing. I am leaving the village now. My bones are tired, and the road is calling me elsewhere. Do not look for me. You already carry everything you need. The kill is yours. So is the silence. So is the tea, with warmth. Tenzin tears fell onto the letter, not in grief, but in gratitude. She poured herself a cup of tea and drank alone. No, not alone. The wind rustled the leaves of the mulberry tree. The clay sang on the wheel. And the silence, as always, listened. Aiko continued making teacups for many years. People came from far away, not for the beauty of the porcelain, but for the peace they found when they held one. Each cup whispered something different, but there was one cup she never sold, cracked, uneven, and whole in its own way. She called it beginning, and in that village between two rivers, silence was never empty again. Story 23. The Mirror of the Monk Long Ago. In a small town nestled beneath the cloudy peaks of the Himalayas, there lived a renowned Zen monk named Ryosen. People traveled from distant villages and cities just to hear him speak or sit with him, in silence. His temple, simple and quiet, stood beside a still lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. Ryosen was known for his rare teachings. He did not preach or lecture, but rather told stories that opened people's hearts. Some called him eccentric, others called him divine, but no one left his temple unchanged. One winter, a wealthy merchant named Daisuke came to visit Ryosen. He was a man of ambition, discipline, and pride. Though his business had made him one of the richest men in the region, he suffered from an invisible restlessness. Despite his success, he could not sleep. His thoughts ran wild at night, filled with worries of betrayal, competition, and loss. His hands trembled when he signed contracts. He had tried medicine, travel, alcohol, women, and art. None of it cured him. He came to Ryosen out of desperation. I have heard, Daisuke said, bowing stiffly, that you possess wisdom. That heals the mind? Ryosen nodded. Sit with me by the lake. We will have tea. As the sun fell behind the mountains, the two men sat in silence. The steam from the tea danced like small ghosts in the cold air. The lake was still, like polished glass. I cannot sleep, Daisuke finally confessed. My wealth grows, yet so does my fear. I'm haunted by the thought that someone will take what I've built. Ryosen sipped his tea. And who built it? Daisuke frowned. I did, with my mind, my sweat, my vision. Then why are you afraid of losing it if it came from you? Because others can steal. Competitors, fate, illness, death. Ryosen smiled. You have mistaken the mirror for the moon. Daisuke blinked. I don't understand. Let me tell you a story, said the monk. There was once a mirror made of obsidian, hidden deep in a cave behind a waterfall. This mirror was said to show one's true face, not the face of skin and bone. But the face beneath all masks, a young man named Kenji, full of arrogance, sought this mirror. He believed himself handsome, wise, and invincible. He had just inherited his father's estate and wanted to confirm his greatness. When he found the mirror, he expected to see a glowing, powerful reflection. But instead, he saw a frightened boy, lost and pale, reaching out for his dead mother's hand. Furious, Kenji shattered the mirror when he returned to the world. He could no longer see his reflection in water, glass, or even in the eyes of others. He had broken the one thing that showed him truth, and so he lived the rest of his life surrounded by illusions, never trusting anyone, never knowing himself. Daisuke frowned. So I'm Kenji. I don't think I've broken anything. Ryasun's voice softened. You fear loss because you believe your value lives in things that can be stolen. Your company, your wealth, your name. But these are only reflections. The real source is within. That source cannot be stolen. I built my empire from scratch, Daisuke said. That doesn't make it unreal. Of course not. But when your peace depends on it, you've become its slave. The merchant shifted uncomfortably. Then, how do I protect what I've earned? Ryasun looked at the lake. You protect it by not needing it. When you are free to lose everything, you finally own it, Daisuke. That sounds poetic, but unrealistic. Ryasun set his cup down. Then perhaps you need to break a mirror of your own. The next morning, Ryasun led Daisuke to a chamber behind the temple. Inside was a single wooden stool, a wall made of polished bronze, and a candle. Sit here, Ryasun said. Look at your face in this wall, and stay until you see the face. Beneath it, Daisuke thought it was nonsense, but he had tried everything else, so he obeyed. Hours passed. His own reflection stared back at him, strong jaw, tired eyes, clenched mouth. But slowly, as the candle flickered and the shadows shifted, his face changed. He saw himself as a boy, playing with his brother before their parents divorced. He saw himself crying in secret when his mother remarried. He saw himself at 20, trembling before his first client, faking confidence. He saw the loneliness in his eyes as he lay awake in hotel rooms, surrounded by gold, but without warmth. He wept when he left the chamber. Ryasun said nothing. Weeks passed. Daisuke did not return to his business immediately. He walked the nearby forests. He swept the temple floors. He learned to cook rice over an open flame. One night, while watching the stars, he felt something he hadn't in years. Stillness. Then he understood. Before leaving, he asked Ryasun one final question. What should I do now? Ryasun smiled. Go back. Be a merchant. Be a man of the world. But remember, you are not your gold. You are not your name. You are the silence beneath it all. Daisuke bowed deeply. And if I forget, Ryasun laughed. Then come back. I'll show you your face again. Years passed. People spoke of a new Daisuke. He still built businesses, but no longer obsessed over rivals. He laughed more. He hired the poor. He wrote letters of forgiveness to old enemies. He slept well, and once a year, without fail, he returned. To the temple, he never spoke of what he saw in the mirror, but he never forgot the silence beneath the name. Story 24. The rain that never ended. The first time Elia saw the monk. It was raining, not a torrential rain, but the kind that soaks you slowly, quietly, without warning. Elias had taken shelter beneath the collapsed frame of an old temple. Gate, his life too, was in ruins. He had left his job a week ago, his wife the week before that, and he hadn't spoken to his father in over a year. The rain was just another layer of silence between him and the world. The monk walked barefoot, as if the mud was sacred, the cold irrelevant. He stopped before Elias, looked into his eyes without blinking, and said, "Are you waiting for the rain to stop, or for your sorrow to evaporate?" Elias didn't respond. The monk simply sat down beside him without invitation, letting the water drip from his saffron robes. There was no urgency in his presence, no discomfort in his stillness. Elias, out of irritation or curiosity, finally asked, "Why sit here? Don't you have somewhere to be?" "I am," the monk replied, "exactly where I need to be." That brief exchange might have faded into memory, like so many things Elias had chosen to forget. But the next morning, the monk was still there, or rather, there again, sweeping the courtyard of the abandoned temple as if it were a sacred monastery. No one had lived in that temple for decades, yet he bowed to the gate, chanted softly to the wind, and swept leaves that would fall again tomorrow. Elias returned every day, drawn not by any intent, but by a strange magnetism. He brought food once, a gesture of politeness. The monk accepted it with a nod, but said nothing more. It wasn't until the 5th day that Elias broke the silence. "Why do you clean a place no one visits?" he asked. The monk didn't look up. "Do you water a plant only when it blossoms?" Elias frowned. "But this place is dead. Nothing is truly dead if the heart perceives life in it." Elias sat on a broken stone and lit a cigarette. "You're wasting your time." The monk smiled, not at him, but at the broom in his hands. Time is only wasted when the heart wanders while the hands move. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of that line, when the heart wanders while the hands move. How long had his heart been wandering? How long had he been merely existing? A week passed. Then too, Elias had stopped smoking. He started sweeping with the monk not because he believed, but because the rhythm of it was better than the chaos in his head. One day, he found himself humming the chant the monk repeated under his breath. "Why do you keep chanting that?" Elias asked, "To remind myself that the rain isn't the problem. The problem is my refusal to walk through it." Elias stopped sweeping. "Are you talking about literal rain or metaphorical?" The monk chuckled. "Do you think your suffering is metaphorical?" Elias said nothing. One evening, a group of villagers came to the temple, curious about the strange monk restoring an old ruin. They brought incense, then candles. The temple lit up with quiet life. Someone brought a donation box. Someone else brought prayer flags. No one asked for permission. They simply responded to the stillness. The dignity of someone treating forgotten things with reverence. Elias watched as the once dead place grew gentle roots, again quiet laughter in the evening. Offerings on the altar, footsteps echoing on stone. But the monk never changed his pace. He still swept the courtyard, still bowed at the gate, still said little dot. It was then Elias asked the one question he had buried. "Why did you come here?" The monk looked at him for a long time, because this place was broken. And I, too, had been broken once. When something broken touches another broken thing with patience, both may begin to remember their shape. Elias nodded, his eyes blurred with tears he didn't hide. Months passed. Elias began waking before the sun. He learned to chant not out of obligation, but out of calm. He stopped avoiding his past. He wrote a letter to his father, another to his wife. He didn't expect replies. That wasn't the point. One morning, he arrived at the temple and found the broom leaning alone against the wall. The monk was gone. No note, no farewell, just the sound of the wind brushing through the trees and the faint impression of footsteps, disappearing into the mist. At first, Elias panicked. Then he remembered the monk's words. Are you waiting for the rain to stop, or for your sorrow to evaporate? He smiled, picked up the broom, and began to sweep. From that day on, Elias kept the temple alive. Not with doctrine, not with sermons, but with presence, with care, with quiet rituals. When asked if he was the new monk, he replied, no, just someone who learned to walk through the rain. Some days it still rained. Some days his heart still wandered. But the broom returned it to his hands. The chant returned it to his breath. The broken place had taught him how to live again, not by changing the world, but by not abandoning it. At the temple's entrance, a wooden sign now reads, in the stillness of rain, some find silence, others rebirth. And beneath it, in smaller letters written by Elias himself, nothing is truly dead if the heart perceives life in it. Story 25. The silence between two raindrops. The rain began at dawn, a soft rhythm falling on the tiled roofs of the old monastery. Inside a dim meditation hall, a boy sat still, eyes closed, legs crossed, shoulders trembling slightly. His name was Jiro. He was not yet 12 and had come to the monastery after the death of his parents in a tragic landslide 3 months ago. The monks called him the one who never speaks. Since the day he arrived, Jiro hadn't said a word. Not to the abbot, not to the gentle old monk who brought him tea each morning, not even to the cat who curled in his blanket at night. On this particular morning, the abbot stood quietly behind him, watching his small frame shake with effort as he struggled to hold the lotus position. Jiro, the abbot, finally said, voice like aged wood, soft but impossible to ignore, come, walk with me. Jiro opened his eyes but said nothing. He rose and followed the old man through the open courtyard, their sandals brushing against wet stone. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. They walked in silence past the bamboo grove, the carp pond, and the moss-covered statues of forgotten Buddhas. Eventually, they stopped at a wooden pavilion where the scent of wet earth and pine mingled in the air. Would you like to hear a story? The abbot asked. Jiro gave a small nod. And so, the abbot began. Long ago, in a land of golden fields and distant mountains, there lived a monk named Renshin, who had also lost everything. His village had burned in a fire, and his family was gone. For many years, he wandered from temple to temple, always searching for answers, always asking the same question. Why do people suffer if they are kind? Why does the earth swallow good people and leave the cruel ones untouched? Eventually Renshin came upon a Zen master who lived alone on a windswept cliff. He asked the old man his question, hoping for a great truth, a cosmic reason. But the master simply pointed to the sky and said, "Do you see the clouds?" "Yes," said Renshin. "Do they choose where to rain?" "No." "Do they ask who deserves the water?" "No." The master smiled. "Then perhaps we should not demand that life chooses fairly either. The rain falls. We learn how to stay drier, to dance." Jiro's eyes flickered, the first shift of emotion in days. But still, he said nothing. The abbot waited a long moment before continuing. After hearing this, Renshin stopped asking why. He stayed with the master for many years and began to find beauty even in sorrow. He found that the pain did not disappear, but it softened. He began to hear music in silence, poetry in the wind. He learned that the space between two raindrops is not emptiness but stillness. Jiro looked out over the mist-covered trees. For a moment, the only sound was the drip of rain on the wooden beams. Then he whispered, his voice fragile from disuse. "Why does silence hurt so much?" The abbot didn't flinch. He merely replied, "Because we try to fill it with the voices of those we've lost." Jiro's lips quivered. He tried to swallow the ache. The abbot reached into his robe and took out a small wooden flute, worn with time. He handed it to the boy. This belonged to a monk who played each morning before sunrise. He believed music could carry prayers that words could not. "Would you like to try?" Jiro hesitated. Then slowly, he raised the flute to his lips and blew. No sound came out, only the soft hiss of breath. But he tried again. This time, a single note trembled in the air. It cracked, it wavered, but it was real. The next day, Jiro returned to the meditation hall with the flute. He sat beside the cat, who purred without judgment. After morning practice, he played again. A note, then two, then silence. And again, the other monks began to pause in their duties, letting his broken music fill the garden paths and echo through the pine. He still spoke little, but now, every evening, as the sun dipped low, he played for those who were gone, and in those notes, the monastery heard not just grief, but beauty, not just sorrow, but memory, not just a boy, but the echo of a mountain that had taken his home, and the voice he had lost beneath the rubble. Weeks passed, the seasons shifted, the rains lessened. One day, as the abbot sat pruning bonsai trees, Jiro approached him and sat in silence for a long time. Then, very softly, he asked, "Do you think they can hear me?" "My mother and father." The abbot placed his shears down, folded his hands, and said, "What do you hear when you play?" Jiro thought about it. "At first, I hear nothing but the wind. Then, I hear the crackle of the fire. I see my mother laughing in the kitchen, my father lifting me onto his shoulders. I feel the mountain. I feel the fear. And then, I hear something soft, like a lullaby." The abbot smiled. "Then they are listening, because that lullaby does not come from memory alone. It is a reply." That night, Jiro stood alone under the stars. The moon was pale and round, the kind his mother used to call the lantern of departed souls. He raised his flute and played not with sorrow, but with reverence. Each note was a prayer, each breath a farewell and a welcome. He no longer feared the silence between raindrops, because now he understood. It was there that the world whispered back. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story from the empty boat. If it resonated with you, if it stirred something quiet within you, or offered a new way of seeing the world, we would love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story stayed with you? Did it open a question, a reflection, a memory? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections not only support the channel, but they help build a circle of shared wisdom and insight. If you found meaning in this journey, consider sharing the video with someone who might also be walking their own path of stillness and awakening. And don't forget to subscribe to The Empty Boat for more gentle, meditative stories that blend Zen teachings with modern healing. May peace walk with you today.